There have always been many people in the world, and most of them were ordinary people who went about their business. However, along with humans, there were other beings in the world that ordinary people simply could not see because they were inaccessible. These beings, invisible to ordinary people, were called spiritual beings, and they possessed various powers. It is worth noting that among humans, there were some individuals who had the ability to see spiritual beings. It was only possible to see such spiritual beings after performing a special ritual called the rite. Such a ritual could enslave a demon in order to transform its spiritual essence into a special ticket. Spiritual beings did not have personalities, but they could use the power of demons for their own interests. When using demonic powers, they could become personalities who carried out punishment. Punishment was carried out on a world full of suffering, and the spiritual being merged with the personality with the help of demonic powers. Some people learned to use the powers of spiritual beings to maintain balance in the world. Some achieved great heights in their training and could control large territories and protect the peaceful population from evil spirits. Some were born into special families and grew up with spirits, so they had to learn to use them and coexist with them. Some did not choose their destiny because the spiritual being chose them as a personality for its own reasons. So people became shamans and organized a council to keep the situation in the world under control. Kim was in high school and often wandered the streets after class because he liked to keep an eye on public order. Unexpectedly, he saw a house that had literally appeared overnight, and he found it very strange. He approached the house to take a closer look, but to his surprise, the door opened slightly and a girl appeared. The girl looked very strange, and there was a very deep scar on her face, and she looked sad. Kim looked at her closely because he realized that she was most likely the owner of this mysterious house. The girl planned to indulge her harmful habit, but when she checked her pockets, she couldn't find any matches. Seeing the young man with light-colored hair, she decided to ask him for matches and called him a chick. Kim was a little taken aback, and the girl explained that he was very yellow, so she decided to call him a chicken. Then our hero sighed and said that he didn't have any and couldn't have any because he was a responsible person when it came to his health. Then he pointed to the bandage on his arm and said that he was an inspector because he was an exemplary student. Kim decided to move on and was upset because he did not expect that someone so exemplary could ask him such a silly question. As he sat on his motorcycle and put on his protective helmet, he could not understand how such people could even exist. However, the strange girl who had managed to ruin his mood unexpectedly called him a chicken again. The girl told him that there could be many dangers in the world, so he should be careful during his trip. Kim was furious and couldn't understand what this strange woman who had appeared out of nowhere was talking about. Then he let go of the clutch and accelerated his motorcycle, saying in parting that it would be better if such people did not throw their cigarette butts anywhere. The girl began to search her pockets again and smiled, saying that the young man was talking nonsense. After a while, she finally managed to find the golden ticket that would allow her to summon a spirit. Throwing the ticket, she summoned a spiritual being to help her fulfill her harmful habit. At that moment, Dukshin, who was a spirit of fire and could control it, began to appear. The mistress of the house was very happy that she had finally managed to find the spirit card and summon him. Dukshin immediately held out his fiery finger to her, and the mistress was able to easily indulge her bad habit. Exhaling steam from her mouth, she looked thoughtfully ahead at the young man who had driven away from her house. She understood that this young man could become a true vessel for the gods. Another young man held his hands up and said that Kim had met a shaman who had recently moved to their city. Kim decided to check the information on his smartphone and realized that the shaman's name was Kavarahan and that she was a very famous shaman. Hwaryahan had her own page on a popular social network, and she said that for a small fee, she could tell anyone their fortune. The young man said that the shaman was very famous for her pilgrimages to holy lands, and therefore many celebrities visited her. In one of the videos, she actively discussed a representative of the Korean parliament, saying that he would soon be caught and punished. At the same time, all her prophecies always came true, and in practice, those whom Kavarhan spoke about were caught and punished the very next day. Kim became curious because he had never heard of the prophecies of such a strange shaman before, and had never met her. At that moment, a crowd of people headed towards Kim Tae-sun to harm him for his actions and behavior. He looked at them with curiosity because he understood that they were nothing more than ordinary worms to him. The crowd of people looking at their opponent realized that he had touched Ken-sok again and were furious because they wanted to take revenge on him for all the insults. Kim Tae-sun smiled and began to get up because he understood that his opponents only knew how to run away from him and did nothing else. Starting to swing his fists, he announced that it was time for punishment and threw his phone at one of his opponents. One of the opponents was hit directly in the face with the phone, and the others were confused. Then he used a fist attack to damage all of his opponents and felt very happy and joyful. The young man who had his hands raised was very surprised that Kim was able to knock everyone down by aiming at their chins. When Kim Tae-son got his phone back, he was furious because he realized that the screen was completely broken and now malfunctioned. While he was very surprised that his phone screen was completely destroyed, he didn't even notice that another student was already behind him. The student happily swung his bat because he realized that he had a chance to take revenge and attack the bully. Our hero began to experience a very strange feeling because he had a premonition of an imminent attack. The young man was confident of victory, but Kim simply turned his head to the side, so he managed to dodge the attack with incredible ease. This caused great surprise to his opponent because he was completely sure that he was in a blind spot. However, while he was thinking about how his opponent was able to dodge, he himself was attacked in the face by the senior inspector. Realizing that our hero had already dealt with all his opponents, he decided to go about his business. Behind him stood the students whose phones and money had been taken. And on the one hand, they were very happy to have such a protector. Kim Tae-sun showed them the bag and told them that he had collected their phones, money, and other items, not leaving their offenders unpunished. On the other hand, they understood that the senior inspector never gave them anything for free. As expected, he said that he would gladly accept 10% from them as a contribution to the current activity fund. The students had no choice but to pay and thank Kim for his assistance in returning their belongings and items. Kim counted his earnings and informed them that his fund would continue to exist as long as they were willing to pay for its existence. Looking at his phone, he thought about the shaman who simply would not leave his mind. Looking through her YouTube videos, he thought that he didn't want to have anything to do with this nun. However, he noticed that his memory had been attacked about his childhood when he thought about something for a long time. So he decided not to think about anything else and go about his business to keep order in the neighborhood. Two shamans watched him and his actions from the roof because they were trying to understand if he was the object of their attention. The shamaness, with a spiritual being in the form of a predatory cat, was convinced that they had found the guy who was the vessel. Recalling and analyzing his movements during the confrontation, she concluded that he was indeed a vessel for the god. Her partner smiled because he was not sure that this particular guy could become a vessel for the god. The girl was a little upset and said that none of this mattered now because she wanted to summon the spirit and chat. Mevi was her spirit creature, and even though he meowed like a kitten, he was as strong as a ferocious tiger. After summoning him, she immediately sent him forward to carry out her plan. Mevi knew that the day of the prophecy was near and that they had to prevent it at all costs. Meanwhile, the food delivery courier was calmly riding his moped to deliver the food. When the young man arrived at the delivery address, he noticed a very beautiful and expensive motorcycle parked in the school parking lot. Coming closer, he looked at the motorcycle with great envy because it was a 1921 model. The courier even took off his helmet because he realized that such a motorcycle was very expensive, and it was strange that it was parked at a high school. Looking closely, he saw that there was a photo of a young man on the helmet that was lying on the motorcycle, and it said that such a handsome guy was the owner. The courier was confused because he couldn't understand how an ordinary high school student could ride such a fancy motorcycle. On the other hand, he understood that most likely the student in the photo was just a kid from a very wealthy family. Most likely, the motorcycle was needed to deliver and quickly distribute orders and assignments. Suddenly, the courier felt very ill and couldn't understand what had happened to him or why he was feeling dizzy. His body began to transform because of the spiritual being that had entered him. All this time, a sparrow was sitting on the roof of the opposite building, watching everything very closely. The sparrow watched every movement and action that took place on the street. It was completely under the control of a shaman who, with the help of the sparrow, could control what was happening. Realizing that the prophecy was beginning to come true, she understood that it was time for her to visit this place to carry out her plans. Before leaving, she looked at the lifeless body of Domaru, who was completely bandaged. When all the lessons were over, Kim decided to check his account balance and realized that he had managed to earn very well and collect a lot of money. Analyzing his account balance, he was happy because he realized that 2 part-time jobs would be enough to pay all his bills. He fondly remembered how last year, he accidentally saw a motorcycle that he had to pay a lot for throughout the year. Kim Tae-sun remembered how he asked the seller to make a concession and sell him this gorgeous new motorcycle on a 12-month installment plan. The year was very difficult and challenging, but finally, his 18th birthday arrived, and the last payment was paid in full. He understood that from today onwards, the KTM 921 would be entirely and solely his personal vehicle. However, when he approached his motorcycle, our hero was horrified because it had been completely destroyed and was beyond repair. Kim Tae-sun stood frozen in horror because he couldn't understand who would dare to do such a thing to his beloved motorcycle. He grabbed passersby to find out who had done such a terrible thing to his faithful iron friend. One of the people he questioned pointed to a man wearing a helmet sitting on the roof of a low building and said that he was the one who had done it. The man in the helmet continued to sit there and did not react, while the onlookers began to film everything on their phones. Kim was furious and started walking towards the man, asking him to immediately remove the pot from his head. However, the man in the helmet simply began to run away in the opposite direction, away from the people. Kim Tae-sun realized that he couldn't just leave it at that. So he immediately ran after the man to find out why he had broken his motorcycle. Passersby were confused because the offender was behaving very strangely and running like a wild animal rather than a human being. His movements were quick and distinct, and he behaved more like a cheetah because he was running on all fours. Kim ran after him diligently because he didn't understand what exactly his beloved and expensive motorcycle had done to him. He didn't understand why the man was running on all fours and thought it was some kind of new concept or a direct path into a trap. Unexpectedly, the man with strange behavior turned the corner into a dead end and completely deserted place. Our hero understood that whoever this man was, he simply had to catch up with him and find out the reasons for his actions. He shouted that he must punish the person who had destroyed a year of his hard work in a matter of seconds. Realizing that it would be very difficult to catch up with someone running so fast, he decided to throw his school bag at him. The bag hit the helmet directly and caused some damage to the motorcycle helmet. Due to the force of the blow, the helmet quickly flew off to the side because it had come off the head of the strangely fleeing man. Approaching closer, Kim Tae-sun clenched his fists in anger and wanted to see his opponent up close. He was overwhelmed with a feeling of rage and injustice because he couldn't understand why his opponent had done this to his motorcycle. He asked his opponent and the hooligan to turn around so that he could get a good look at his face and understand who it was. However, he was astonished because when the man turned around, his face was cat-like, and he only spoke in meows. Kim Tae-sun even involuntarily took a step back because he could not understand what was wrong with the face of the man he had caught up with. However, while he was in a state of shock, the cat-like man attacked him with his sharp claws. Kim was speechless because he had never seen anything like this before and was very surprised by what was happening. He immediately jumped back because he could clearly see the huge claws completely covering his body. However, upon examining his body, he realized that his shirt was completely intact and there was not a single scratch on him. Suddenly, he began to experience a terrible feeling of fear, something he had never felt before. Analyzing his emotions, he realized that his instinct for self-preservation was telling him that the guy in front of him was very dangerous. The young man with the cat's face said nothing except meow and yeah, but he smiled very strangely. Possessed by the spirit of Mevi, he immediately went on the offensive because he wanted to defeat his opponent. Kim Tae-sun prepared to block the attacks because he understood that his opponent was much stronger than he was. Our hero understood that his opponent's movements were very fast, but he managed to dodge his attacks. He diligently tried to calculate his opponent's actions and movements in order to attack him. However, his opponent's actions were too chaotic, and Kim Tae-sun could not dodge them. So at some point, he simply fell. Mevi left a very deep mark on the wall because his claws were sharp and the brick wall was no obstacle. Kim was lucky and was on the ground when an attack of such force was made that the brick wall began to crumble. Unable to bear it, he decided to ask his opponent if he was in his right mind and why he was doing all this. He didn't understand why it was necessary to break the wall, but he understood that if he hadn't dodged, he would have ended up like that wall. Suddenly, Kim Tae-sun heard a familiar voice asking the chicken if he was still alive. The shaman sat on a large golden-maned dragon and said that he was holding up even better than she could have imagined. Kim was a little surprised, so he looked questioningly at the shaman who had appeared out of nowhere. However, she was even more surprised that he was simply floating in the air because she understood that people simply did not know how and could not do such things. The shaman asked Kang Chol to lower her down because she realized that Kim was unable to see ghosts. This meant that he also could not see the ghost of the cat that completely controlled the boy's body. Kim did not understand how a ghost could control a person's body, but the shaman asked him to turn around immediately. Turning around, Kim realized that the young man, who was completely possessed by the demonic ghost, was trying to attack him again. The shaman explained to him that the demon cat was capable of displaying powers that ordinary people had never even seen before. Kim listened to her carefully and tried hard to dodge all of his opponent's attacks because he understood that he wanted to live. The shaman was surprised because an ordinary person could not so easily avoid the attacks of a demonic ghost. Mevi continued to laugh happily because he felt his advantage and control over the situation. Kim thanked the shaman for explaining what was happening and did not understand why she had come, since she just stood and watched what was happening. The shaman saw everything differently because she understood that the vessel was on a completely different level and was very different from an ordinary person. She understood that the chick could not see the demonic ghost, but felt the danger on an instinctive level. He also reflexively avoided the attacks of the invisible enemy, who was very strong. At some point, Mevi calculated the enemy's characteristic actions and reactions and was able to approach him in a different way. Kim was confused because he couldn't keep up with the enemy's actions and realized that he simply couldn't dodge. It was at that moment that he was attacked and injured because his shoulder was badly scratched. Kim realized that today had indeed been a strange day and that the human body did have its limits after all. He understood that as soon as the shamaness crossed his path, his life had completely changed and gone downhill. Kim remembered how he just wanted to go with the flow and live his own life, but he realized that karma had caught up with him. He felt very sorry for his motorcycle and asked it for forgiveness because he understood that he simply could not take revenge on his enemy for it. The motorcycle asked him to pull himself together and not betray it, but to gather his strength and deal a decisive blow to the enemy. The shaman watched closely and realized she had made a mistake because Kim was able to avoid the attack on his vital points. Nuna understood that it was too difficult to go to another world, so she decided to continue and help the chick after all. She threw several different coupons at him and asked the demonic Lion of Greatness to breathe life into him and heal the boy's wounds. The shaman possessed enormous power and could therefore control various spiritual beings. After a while, she summoned Dukshin, who was a fiery spiritual being. Kim Tae-sun did not understand what was happening to him because he began to feel very strange and his body was too hot. His body began to transform, and instead of hair on his head, he had a blazing flame of eternal fire. The shaman watched with interest and curiosity because she wanted to assess the chick's power. Dukshin began to completely control the body of the man who had become his personality. Kim couldn't understand what exactly had happened to him, but he liked the feeling of power. He felt that he was becoming much stronger, and his wounds had completely healed. The shaman warned the chick that Dukshin was the strongest of all the ghosts, but it was not easy to use his power. The spiritual being Dukshin completely absorbed Kim Tae-sun's body in order to use it. Maybe was confused because he was completely confident in his victory and did not expect to find himself in such a position. He even began to feel fear because he understood that his opponent now had the upper hand. Then, the lady who controlled him decided to resort to cunning and use stronger demonic abilities. Using special cat techniques, she decided to use her enormous cat claws. The fingers of the young man, who was under the complete control of Mevi's spirit, began to transform into huge cat claws. Meanwhile, the opponent stood calmly and watched what was happening without attempting to defend himself. At one point, he simply jumped up and found himself completely between the cat's claws, and the only damage was a torn shirt. Mevi saw the young gentleman's shirt fly into small pieces and began to anticipate the taste of victory. However, at some point, his hand began to transform again, and the bones inside simply shattered. Dukshin was already right behind him and even called out because he wanted to punish him for damaging his motorcycle. Mevi turned around and was horrified to discover that the spiritual being, who was significantly stronger than him, was behind him in his blind spot. At that very moment, he was punched directly in the nose. The shockwave was so powerful that it simply knocked him some distance to the side. Kim Tae-sun realized that he was no longer nervous and felt no fear. Smiling with fiery energy, he declared that it was time to take complete control of the initiative. The shaman was furious with excitement because for the first time in a very long time, she was able to see Dukshin's true power. She understood that now she was facing a genius of skills who was an exceptionally talented person. The guy who was possessed by the demonic spirit of a cat was confused, realizing that he was in a difficult situation. Verhan was delighted because she had not seen such great power and such a quick fusion with the spirit in a very long time. At the same time, she was so absorbed in her thoughts that she did not immediately notice that the chick was planning to attack her. Kim Tae-sun smiled and informed her that the shaman was also the target of the attack. Hwarihan realized that the obsession was not over yet, which was why he had tried to attack her. This meant that the young master was in a trance and had not yet awakened in the unconscious space. At the same time, if he could not wake up in this state, it would be impossible to take complete control of him. Kim Tae-sun floated in an amorphous, unconscious state and did not yet fully understand what was happening. Mevi watched with curiosity because his opponent had attacked his second opponent. He found everything that was happening strange, because even the strongest spirit, Dukshin, had not been able to completely absorb the young master. The cat girl who controlled the spirit asked Mevi not to talk and to complete the mission as soon as possible. She completely restored the arm of the young man who worked as a courier so that he could fully continue the confrontation. Therefore, Mevi reactivated the demonic spiritual technique of the cat spirit in order to carry out an attack on the ground. Kim Tae-san was confused because his opponent had used a fur attack technique, and so his hands were tied. The shaman was a little upset because she understood that while the chick was in a trance, his reflexes simply did not work. However, she was so engrossed in her thoughts about what was happening that she did not notice another cat's tail behind her. In an instant, she simply waved her fan to block the attack and avoid it. The shaman was confused and couldn't understand how Mew's cat spirit dared to attack her. The owner of the demonic spirit was not surprised because she understood that she would not be able to do anything against such a strong opponent anyway. She understood that her main task was to catch Kim Tae-soon and prevent him from becoming a vessel for the god. Therefore, having completely bound Dukshin, she already felt complete control over the situation and wanted to deliver the final attack. The technique of a cat attacking with all its strength against the enemy was chosen as the attacking element. Dukshin understood that the situation was completely out of control, which meant that such a rapid end could come. The girl controlling Mevi was confused and realized that now, under the control of the fiery creature, the young man was too strong. Then she decided to demonstrate all the power she had at her disposal. This technique was called the unbearable fur and was similar to the creation of a demonic drill of enormous size. The shaman herself did not expect to see such a thing. Realizing that the chick was now truly in danger, she understood that the chick had no motivation to wake up, so there were no signs of unconscious awakening. Looking at and analyzing the situation, she realized that she didn't have time to look for his motives and decided to simply use another ghost spirit. However, to her great surprise, the young man suddenly started talking about 5 million won. He shouted at his opponent and asked him to return his money because he did not plan to give up just like that. Verhan even opened her mouth in surprise because she realized that the chick had managed to cope and wake up in the unconscious space after all. The girl controlling the demonic spirit of the cat was beside herself with anger because she did not expect the boy of destiny to be able to awaken. The cat prepared to launch the strongest attack possible using the unbearable fur technique. Dukshin also had no intention of giving up, so he tried hard to free himself from the trap he had fallen into. The shaman decided to motivate him and shouted to the chick that if he could defeat his opponent, she would gladly give him 5 million won. 5 million won spread through the space around him, and Kim Tae-sun could already hear these beautiful and enticing sounds. This phrase prompted him to wake up and take action, because money had always been very important to him. Dukshin was glad that the person he had possessed had woken up and started to bite through the rope that was restraining his movements. His strength was so great that the unbearable fur was defeated in a matter of seconds. Mevi was confused and couldn't understand how this was even possible. Dukshin was furious and immediately launched an attack on his opponent, anticipating the taste of victory. Mevi couldn't hold out and simply fell to the ground because he hadn't planned on his opponent being able to free himself at all. Kim Tae-sun continued to attack because he understood that 5 million won was at stake. Hwaryahan was delighted because she had found a way to motivate the chicken and realized that he was too simple. Looking at him closely, she understood that such a beautiful young man would have a wonderful future as a vessel. Mevi was attacked and even lost consciousness, and there was a bright mark on his cheek from his opponent's fist. Kim was very happy and understood that he had won, but he couldn't understand why his head looked like a large lighter. Hwanhwan was very happy because she understood that the barrier had been completely overcome and everything was going according to her original plan. Her face changed slightly when the chick suddenly addressed her as sister, which she found strange. Kim Tae-sun told her with a smile that he had completely fulfilled the task and therefore wanted to receive the promised millions of won. The shaman was a little confused because she realized that instead of being surprised by the situation, the chick was only thinking about money. Kim was very happy and was already planning how to spend the money he had received, but the shaman said she would not give him the money. He did not understand why his sister had suddenly decided to change her mind and not keep her promises. Approaching the young man, she said that she had planned to give him the money, but only on the condition that he did his job well. After that, Hwanhyun grabbed the ghostly spirit of the cat by the tail to prevent it from returning to its owner. Smiling, she said that it was not the same as grabbing an ordinary person, so she did not plan to pay him for his work. The courier was unconscious because he himself could not understand what had happened to him. Kim Tae-sun was furious. He grabbed Hwanheran and said that he did not care and asked her not to make him an ordinary pawn. The shaman was dissatisfied with his behavior and said that she had had enough of his intolerable behavior. Touching his forehead with her fingertip, she ordered the demonic creature Dukshin to simply fall asleep. Kim did not understand what was happening to him at that moment because the spiritual creature began to leave him along with his powers. As soon as the chick fell asleep, the shaman realized that she had wasted her time on all that. The demonic spirit of the cat was very frightened and did not understand what was happening and what fate awaited him. Destroying Mevi's spirit, the shaman said that she would gladly find every child of the shaman and take his life. The girl who controlled the cat's spirit began to feel very ill, and blood started flowing from her nose. Her assistant began to worry about her condition because he realized that her connection with the cat had been completely destroyed. At that moment, the central spirit asked the shaman's children to calm down and lower their voices. The spirit informed them that their presence had been detected and that their main task and goal had now been completely shifted. He explained that they now had to do everything in their power to protect the main lantern itself. The elder told his students that everything had to go perfectly, so they had to go and start their preparations. Meanwhile, Kim Tae-sun's childhood memories began to appear before his eyes. He remembered how other people constantly humiliated him and said that he was so worthless that even his own mother had abandoned him. His mother was a shaman who often performed rituals and ceremonies in her own home. She worried about her son because when he came home after school, he was always crying and very upset. The shaman tried to always smile and worried when her little treasure came home very sad or upset. Realizing that the child was being bullied because he didn't have a father, his mother told him that they actually had everything. Stroking her beloved child's head, she asked him not to cry and told him that the others bullied him out of envy. Kim smiled and promised his mother that he would never cry again, even though he understood that she was simply deceiving him. His mother told him that she had several talismans and that when she was able to use them, they would become very rich. In reality, their family had no money at all and often had to delay paying the rent. However, despite all the difficulties, his mother, a shaman, always tried to be as positive as possible. From childhood, he had been taught that being a poor shaman and constantly deceiving loved ones was considered absolutely normal. The only thing Kim Tae-sun really liked was that his mother was always there for him and supported him. One day, he came home from school and happily opened the door, shouting to his mother that he was back. Looking around, he realized with horror that his mother was not at home, but there was a note from her on the table. Picking up the piece of paper, he realized that it was a whole letter from his mother, which she had left before leaving. The letter said that his mother had left in search of freedom, and that day became a turning point in the boy's life. She said that she had no money left and hoped that she had raised him well enough that he could take care of himself. At the very end, she wrote that she had been forced to save her own life, so now he could live as he wished. Kim was very upset because he realized that his mother had no money left to raise him, and she simply couldn't cope. At some point, he realized that his mother had left him in order to start living her wonderful life, but without him. After a while, his sadness turned into determination, and he firmly decided that he would also earn a lot of money in order to live better than his mother. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and realized that tears were streaming down his face, and his shirt was indeed torn from the struggle. Kim Tae-sun tried to pull himself together and remember what had happened to him and where he was at that moment. At that moment, Hwan-hyun approached him and smiled, confirming that he had indeed woken up. She laughed because she didn't understand what could have been so sad in the chick's dream that he even cried. Wiping away his tears and rubbing his eyes, Kim decided to ask where they were, and the shaman replied that they were at her house. Then he understood why he had dreamed about his mother, because it was influenced by the shaman's incense. This incense was a mixture of herbs used by many shamans, and his mother was no exception. Looking around, he realized that there were many things in the house that reminded him of his parents' home. In one place, he saw a mummy that was completely wrapped in bandages, with many talismans on top. Kim was not only surprised, but also a little scared, and pointing his finger at the mummy, he asked what it was and why it was there. Hwan-hyun explained that this body did indeed have no soul, but it was still a real living organism. She said that this was the most important and significant person to her, so she couldn't just part with him. Kim was confused and did not understand what was happening in Nuna's house and why she needed a mummified body. Adjusting her glasses, the shaman realized that the young man was interested in knowing who she was, so she decided to tell him the story. She said that she was actually the reincarnation of the virgin of the heavenly king Margot, who was the best shaman in the whole world. The shaman also said that according to the prophecy, God was to be born in the body of an 18-year-old boy in whom the main lantern was present. Kim was very surprised when he realized that she was talking about him, but he did not understand what main lantern she was referring to. Then she decided to explain to him what the main lantern was and described a situation in which a person is hit by a bus. In the last seconds of his life, his entire life and memories flash before his eyes, reminding him of what his life was like. This is the main light that sends the owner a signal about a danger that could have been avoided. This light is a specific element that the gods themselves created long before humans appeared on Earth. Explaining all this, Huihan explains that the feeling he had during the confrontation was a clear example of how the light works. Kim did not understand how something like this could exist in his body, and how he could recognize it. The shaman explained that he was the main character of the prophecy, with the main light in which the god was to be born. Kim did not believe her, and did not understand how a god, who was to become the king of all demons and creatures, could be born inside him. However, to the shaman's great surprise, the young man stopped being surprised and asked her what exactly all this could mean and what it could influence. Leaning the shaman against the wall, the chick replied rudely that he didn't care at all whether he was a god or a demon. All he cared about now was that the girl had not given him the promised 10 million won. Hwaryahan laughed and joked that perhaps the young man had simply decided to flirt with her in this strange way. Kim Tae-sun asked her not to make things up because he wanted her to give him his money back, and then they would part ways. Exhaling, she realized that people were indeed creatures who were very addicted to money. Then she took out some won and waved the money in front of him, asking if he wanted it. While Kim began to drool and completely lost his vigilance, the shaman easily attacked him. She explained that the rotating lantern could give him enormous power, but at the moment, its abilities were too weak. The shaman said that the lantern in the owner's body causes obsession with life, but apparently he was only obsessed with money. This meant that if the owner had a lot of money, he would begin to feel safe, and his existence would simply lose its meaning. She also told him that there were many personalities in the world, such as the cat, who did not like their existence. At one point, she even started shouting to explain to him that he was actually a direct vessel for God. Lying on the floor, Kim admitted that he was not at all interested in the story of the gods of the soul, because it seemed more like a fairy tale. He understood that his current reality consisted of owning a completely broken motorcycle. After all, tomorrow was his birthday, and he was supposed to become the official owner of his little motorcycle. He was hysterical because he had worked hard for a whole year to earn enough money to pay off the motorcycle he had bought on credit. The shaman said that she was not interested in this at all because she had completely different goals and a strategic plan of action. Suddenly, Kim came to his senses because he smelled a very strange smell that he had never smelled before. Then the shaman opened her briefcase, which contained a huge amount of money. Kim Tae-sun immediately had his brain washed because he had never seen a suitcase full of money before. After doing some calculations, he realized that he had a whole billion won in front of him, which he was ready to receive by completing any task. Seeing his reaction, the shaman decided to clarify whether he was really interested and ready to do what she said. Kim couldn't get himself together because he was already thinking and making a whole plan on how to spend such a large amount of money. She said that if his birthday tomorrow went well, she would gladly give him a whole suitcase of money. Kim was angry because he realized that the task was too simple, which meant that the shaman had decided to deceive him again. On the other hand, there was a huge pile of money in front of him, so he promised to get through tomorrow safely. The shaman was delighted that the chick had become so obedient and willing to fulfill all her conditions and tasks. He was already eagerly awaiting the arrival of tomorrow so that he could live through it as quickly as possible and get so much money. Varnhan understood that 8 years had already passed, and this time, she really had to succeed. She understood that she had to turn this boy into a real great god so that she could then use this power. All this was because she wanted so much to take revenge for all the events that had happened 8 years ago. Taking off her glasses, she announced that the agreement between them was complete and she was ready to fulfill its terms. Grabbing the boy by his shirt, she told him that he had to bow down before her. After that, she put dark sunglasses on him and said she had a gift for him. Kim, putting on the glasses, did not understand what she was doing, but through the glasses, he saw everything completely differently. The next morning, he went to school and did not take off his glasses, thanks to which he could see ghostly creatures. Students and teachers asked him to stop because he could not go to school looking like that and wearing such accessories. The older students began to actively discuss the actions of the senior inspector, believing that he had lost his mind after his motorcycle was destroyed. Kim said that he had undergone laser vision correction and, as prescribed by his doctor, could not take off his sunglasses. The teacher was furious and could not understand how a student with perfect vision could lie to his own teacher. One of the ghostly creatures had already approached the teacher in order to completely take over his body and use it for its own purposes. At that moment, thanks to his glasses, Taesung also noticed the monster and immediately attacked it. But the teacher did not understand what was happening. The teacher was furious and couldn't understand how a student could dare to raise his hand against his teacher. Kim adjusted his glasses and realized that they were really cool. But the ghost he saw was not simple. Suddenly, he saw a huge creature in front of him that was engulfed in flames and looked very frightening. The shaman began to laugh and said that it was not a creature, but someone who had entered his body, and his name was Dukshin. Kim Tae-sun was confused and did not understand who this guy in front of him was and why his whole head was on fire. Dukshin said nothing and patiently watched what was happening because he understood that the shaman was his mistress. Hwanran said that the glasses helped him not only to see ghosts, but also to communicate and interact with them. She said that the enemy would try to attack in the same way as last time, using various types of ghosts. That was why she had given him the glasses, so that he could see these ghosts on the day of the prophecy, March 1st, according to the lunar calendar. While in the school building, Kim realized that nothing particularly unusual had happened yet, so he wasn't worried. On the other hand, he knew for sure that someone possessed by a demon was definitely following him. There was still about 3 hours until noon, and if he managed to survive, he would receive a whole billion won. Suddenly, he felt a very strange aura and realized that his enemies and opponents of the prophecy had already come for him. Looking out the window, he saw a very strange guy behind him who had some kind of very strange object. Wrapped in bandages, the elder ordered his student to immediately free him and let him out because he was ready to attack. The student immediately obeyed the order and freed the elder, who had 3 faces, from his bandages. The other students were also confused and did not understand what was happening on the street, thinking that it was a folk game. The teacher went out into the street and approached the man to clarify what exactly he had decided to do on school grounds. He said that no outside personnel were expected, according to the schedule, and asked for permission from the school committee. Watching the young man closely, the teacher couldn't take it anymore and asked him to leave the school grounds or show his permission. However, he saw that an object resembling a huge wooden statue suddenly began to approach him. The elder opened his mouth wide and simply swallowed the teacher, who had decided to stand in his way. The teacher screamed and called for help, while all the students watched what was happening and were afraid to move. Exhaling, the elder laughed a little and said that he had eaten well and heartily. Unexpectedly, one of the faces decided to take the main place of the manager and therefore changed abruptly. He shouted that they should strictly follow the general's instructions and that they could engage in all sorts of nonsense later. The students watching what was happening were confused and became very frightened because the teacher was no longer there. Kim Tae-sun also became wary because he understood that the enemy was indeed very strange and probably strong. Looking at his opponents, he began to realize that he was facing shamans who possessed great power. However, he could not understand why they had decided to attack him in such a strange way. At that moment, a very strange ghostly creature began to approach his hand, trying hard to bite him. Kim didn't understand what it was, but he didn't plan to leave it on his hand, so he immediately began to shake it off. Looking around, he realized that something very strange and frightening was happening. All the students were under the influence of the little creatures and now looked more like ordinary puppets. They all repeated the mantra that they must strictly follow only the orders of their beloved and revered general. Kim had mixed feelings because he realized that at that moment, he was the most popular target for the demonic creatures. Then he remembered that when he was with the shaman, she had given him a talisman that was a sealed block and could contain spirits. At that moment, he was quite far from understanding all these things, so he stared at the strange ticket for a long time. The shaman explained to him that Dukshin would be sealed in this amulet, and he would be able to use it when he was attacked. Kim was scared and didn't want some guy inside his body, so he didn't understand why his sister couldn't just protect him. But the shaman pointed to the mummy and said that she had to protect the heavenly body, which had also become practically a god before his appearance. Kim stretched and realized that his immediate task for tomorrow would be to simply survive, and then he would receive 1 billion won. The shaman was very pleased that the chick was so smart and easygoing. Kim told her that if she didn't keep her promise, he would do anything and use all his strength to destroy all her plans. The shaman realized that the chick was still very angry that she hadn't given him money during the confrontation with Mevi. Then she went to the suitcase and threw 10 million won into it, saying that he could consider it his advance payment. Kim was delighted and stroked the stacks of money because he had never held such a large amount in his hands before. Hwa Ryung-han asked him to remember that it wasn't the money that was important to her, but that everything went strictly according to plan. Kim smiled and asked her not to worry because he understood that he would do anything for money. He understood that a whole billion won was at stake, so he decided to just try to escape from his opponents. His opponents were his classmates, who were completely under the influence and control of the elder. He understood that all his classmates were possessed, but such a number deserved praise. The students ran after him through the school corridors, and since they could not control their bodies well, they even fell on top of each other. None of them had their consciousness anymore, and only talked about how they had to follow the general's orders. Looking around, Kim realized that it was not only his classmates who were running after him, but all the students of the school. Then he realized that he had no choice but to use Dukina's spirit. His whole body began to transform, and a fiery wave of energy appeared on his head. Having mastered the power of the demonic ghost spirit Dukshin, he realized that he could now easily win in such a confrontation. The school students continued to pursue the senior class inspector thanks to their obsession. Dukshin, in the body of his new host, was delighted because he now had the opportunity to demonstrate his powers. He jumped and attacked the students, easily passing through the entire crowd of possessed people. At one point, he even began to enjoy himself and grabbed two students to have a little fun. Then he simply pushed their foreheads together so that they collided as if they were kissing. Running away through the long school corridors, Dukshin laughed loudly, realizing that such worms simply could not catch him. At one point, he was moving so fast that the school students simply could not keep up with his actions. Then he easily passed them by, even managing to attack them. From each of them, he collected goblin roads, which were ghosts that sucked and manipulated people for their own interests. The ghosts screamed because they realized they had been caught, but Dukshin had no intention of stopping, so he simply bit through them. He understood that if he won, he would receive a whole billion. So he asked his opponents to come closer and not be shy. The general and his assistant understood that Dukshin was very good and confident during the confrontation. The student said that it was not entirely Dukshin's fault because the young man could calmly control his mind while possessed by the spirit. At one point, several possessed senior students managed to grab Dukshin by the pant leg. Since a large number of students were able to grab him, the destructive power of the main lantern weakened for a while. Then the elder realized that most likely this young man simply could not fully reveal his inner potential. At some point, Kim Tae-san moved on to the next level of his rage and simply pushed away everyone who was trying to hold him back. He understood that all his opponents were weaker than Mevi the cat, but they were too numerous. This meant that at this rate, it would be a little difficult to finish everything by noon. At that moment, his phone rang, so he put the earpiece in his ear to answer the call. On the other end was a shaman, who said she called him because she was a little worried about his condition and health. Dukshin said that things were not going very well for them, because Chongshin had turned all the students who could be in the building against him. The shaman was a little surprised because she understood that Chansung was a very strong opponent and was called the General of the World. She said that the General of the World had 3 faces, and he needed to know which one controlled people in order to destroy that connection. Suddenly, the shaman said that a courier had come to her, and then simply ended the call. Kim did not understand why Nuna had interrupted the call just when he really needed help. Then, after thinking for a moment, he decided to follow her advice and attacked the building to clear the space around him. After making a small hole in the wall, he simply decided to jump out onto the street so that the students could not catch up with him. Landing below, he found himself directly in front of the Elder General of Peace and his student. He understood that he had to destroy one of the general's faces by any means necessary so that he would stop controlling the students. After carefully examining his opponent, he decided that he should destroy all 3 faces. So he jumped up and immediately headed towards his opponent to attack him. However, during the flight, he noticed that the general's student was trying to attack him. He immediately decided to return to his previous position to avoid the attack. The student looked very upset and dissatisfied, saying that such a trifle should be at home with his mother. Dukshin began to laugh, saying that all this was not serious, and that such jokes had long gone out of fashion. However, his inner rotating beacon warned him that this clown was very strong and powerful. To their great surprise, the General of the World ordered them to stop immediately and end the debate. He said that the child from the prophecy was holding up very well, so he suggested that he simply surrender and discuss everything. He added that otherwise he would cause great difficulties and problems for the student who was climbing out of the window. The student was holding onto the window frame with one hand and said that it was too high to jump. Kim said that he didn't care whether the student fell or not because the main thing for him was that he himself would not be the one to do it. On the other hand, falling from such a height still offered a good chance of survival and continuing to exist. However, he couldn't resist and immediately headed towards the falling student to save him. The General of Peace realized that the young man was indeed a leader, so he quickly rescued the boy from the window. Kim laughed and he saw a wallet falling, so he just couldn't walk by and decided to save him. At some point, his arms simply stopped obeying him, and he realized that his strength was simply running out. Chongsin began to laugh loudly and say that he was actually very weak and therefore should have surrendered. Kim Tae-song activated his powers and said that under no circumstances would he agree to just give up. However, at that moment, he was attacked in the face by his opponent and clenched his teeth in pain. The shockwave was so powerful that it even knocked him several meters away toward the school wall. His opponent said that he was too stupid because his mind was completely consumed by the spirit of a demon. Putting on a mask, he said that he would gladly become his punishment and punish him for all his actions. He asked Kim to resist with all his might so that he could give him real pleasure. Smiling, he said that today, on his birthday, he would meet his end. Some doors could not withstand such forces and began to collapse completely. People began to fall under the influence of evil spirits and immediately went on the attack. At that moment, the shaman realized that something was wrong, so she decided to come to the rescue to control the situation. She was upset because the evil spirits had arbitrarily blown up the doors to her house and announced that they wanted to attack her. As soon as she finished confronting them, the General of Peace appeared, laughing and saying that she was very harsh. He said he was very happy to see her because he even wanted to hug her since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Looking closely, she realized that in front of her was the General's wife, whom they had not seen for 8 years and who was participating as an opponent. The General's wife began to twist her face and say that she had probably forgotten something. Then she turned to her opponent with a different face, because 8 years ago, she was the one who had participated. Laughing, she said that her husband had ordered her to take her life, but she could show mercy and simply make her her personal servant. Her subjects, who were actually ordinary passers-by possessed by an evil spirit, stopped for a moment. The possessed mini-spirits began to leave their bodies because they had received such an order from their general's wife. The shamaness became alert because she understood that the inhabitants of the city had simply been deprived of their lives in such a strange way. Opening her mouth wide, the statue of the general's wife began to devour all the spirits in order to increase her power. A huge number of spirits began to flock from the surrounding area in order to return to their mistress. The shaman understood that the front face controlled the left side of the team, and the third face controlled the absorption of demonic spirits. The general's wife continued to smile because she understood that her opponent was too well informed, and she prepared to launch a direct attack with her whole body. She understood that the shaman remembered everything well, including the fact that she had beautifully decorated her face with a large scar. The shaman was very angry and decided to remind the general's wife of the damage she had suffered that day. The woman admitted that she remembered perfectly well how she had skinned her for 4 whole years, and that it was simply impossible to forget such a thing. She said that she remembered her kindness 8 years ago and the injury she had inflicted on her at that time. That is why Changsun's wife asked her enemy to surrender and allow her to take the heavenly body that had long since become a mummy. Demonstrating her powers, she announced that her beloved and powerful husband had given her the power of 100 demons. Activating the power of the chief demon, she announced that she was no longer as weak as she had been 8 years ago. Hwanhyun waved her fan and reminded everyone that she was the reincarnation of the Virgin of the Heavenly King, the Great Isis. Meanwhile, Dukshin was trying to figure out how exactly he should act in the current situation. The assistant to the General of Peace asked him to return all the spirits and gather all his strength so that he could regain his third face. The elder agreed because he understood that now he would be able to see the Great Clown's skills of disguise. The Great Clown laughed and said that he would gladly demonstrate all his powers and abilities. Kim said that he would not allow them to stand there and do whatever they wanted because this was his territory. Therefore, he immediately began to attack his opponent because he did not want to let him win. However, the man in the clown mask did not react to these attacks because they were too weak for him. He began to launch various attacks himself in order to increase the distance between them during the confrontation. Dukshin was having fun and said that his fiery blows were still incomparable to anything else. Grabbing some sand and dust from the ground, he threw it at his opponent to reduce his vigilance. The clown immediately covered himself with his hand from the sand, saying that it was too weak and that such a move would not work on him because he was wearing a mask. However, to his surprise, Dukshin looked very confident and laughed, saying that his opponent should not relax. At that moment, the shaman raised her hands and asked her opponent to stop and not make any hasty movements. Kim was confused and did not understand why the shaman Nuna was in front of him and how such a thing could be possible. He did not understand why she was here and where the clown had gone, because he could not have just left so quickly. Nuna told him that she had come to help and did not understand who he was looking for so fiercely. At that moment, she dealt him very heavy damage, and Kim did not have time to defend himself because he did not expect it. He did not understand why she had decided to attack him, and therefore tried to understand what had actually happened. The clown laughed and said that the #1 ability of a clown was the power of done. His main magic was to transform into another person, into absolutely any personality. Laughing, the clown said that his opponent should be more vigilant and focused in his actions and attacks. The clown's second ability was a guand that helped him split into several copies. Kim said that 5 opponents against 1 was not fair. The clown told him that he was talking too much, and all 5 immediately began to attack him to get closer to victory. Dukjin covered his head with his hands and tried hard to concentrate so as not to lose. He was furious and didn't understand why everyone wanted to kill him on his birthday. At one point, a classmate appeared in front of him, crying loudly and begging him not to hit him. As Kim hesitated, the clown immediately attacked him in the face, laughing that he had believed in his tricks again. The blow caused him to lose his balance, but he was caught by his classmate, who also looked very frightened. The classmate continued to recite a mantra about how he had to obey the general's orders, but he could no longer remember who the general was. Dukushin remembered that he had saved this very boy when he had almost fallen out of a window while possessed. Then he decided to attack him because he thought it was just another clown's trick. But to his surprise, the young man did not turn into a clown, but only said during freefall that he was in a lot of pain. Dukshin was even more confused, and the clown was behind him, saying that he dared to hit his friend. At that moment, the clown managed to launch a powerful attack on his opponent because he did not expect it at all at that moment. Kim Tae-sun lay on the ground and realized that he was really in a lot of pain. Several copies of the clown began to reach out their hands to him, and he could do nothing about it. They easily brought Kim to his knees so that he could no longer resist. The clown became curious about where his opponent's arrogance had gone, and he felt sorry that he had become a vessel for God. Taking off his mask, he said that the young gentleman simply knew nothing yet, and wanted to tell him everything about the situation in the spirit world. Looking into the eyes of the vessel for the god, he said that the girl Kvarhan had simply decided to use him for her own purposes. He said that the shamaness possessed great power and used it solely to take the lives of other shamans. At the same time, she acted solely to completely destroy certain types of connections. Meanwhile, Kvarhan continued to actively attack the general's wife in order to win. Each of her movements was precise and clear, so with the help of her fan, she easily attacked her opponent. Her ideal plan was to destroy all the connections between the shamans and create her own world of evil, ruled by demonic ghosts. The clown explained the whole situation to the young gentleman so that he would surrender and continue to live freely. Dukshin said he didn't believe him because he had tried to kill him several times and had no right to dictate who was good and who was bad. The clown was confused because he couldn't understand how an inexperienced boy could have so much power. While he was thinking about this, his opponent tried to attack him to get a chance at victory. Dukina's main task was to remove and destroy the clown's mask so that he would completely lose all his strength. He shouted that they themselves had used the powers of poor students to enhance their abilities, which meant that they were also evil. The clown realized that talking was useless in this situation and decided to use his great clowning ability again. He immediately began attacking the young man to make him lose his balance and become weaker. However, to his great surprise, at some point, Dukshin simply grabbed his leg during the attack. Dukshin laughed because he understood that the rotating lamp did not warn him of danger, which meant he was stronger. Smiling, he said that he didn't care about anything and would be on either side only if he was well paid for it. The clown was somewhat confused because he was not ready for such a turn of events. Kim looked very confident and did not understand where he got such a surge of strength. The clown adjusted his mask and looked closely at his opponent, not understanding what had happened to his eyes. His energy was much calmer than before, because he had probably been able to adapt during the confrontation. The great clown did not plan to lose, so in a few seconds, he created a large number of copies of himself. He understood that he simply could not allow this young gentleman to interfere with the implementation of their plan. Having created the great clown's domain, he went on the offensive because he could not let down the entire association of shamans on the day of the prophecy. However, unexpectedly for him, Dukshin was already in another place and attacked him from the opposite side. Kim Tae-sun desperately wanted to destroy the clown's mask because he was very tired of participating in this circus performance. One of the clowns simply fell because he did not have time to block the damage or resist the enemy at such speed. Blood began to flow from his nose, and he began to wipe it with his hand, covering his face without the mask, which had been destroyed. Kim jumped up and asked his opponent to clench his teeth so that he would not start whimpering like a puppy in pain. His eyes burned and looked more like the eyes of a demonic, ghostly creature. After that, he launched another powerful attack on his opponent to reduce the number of pacifiers. The clown began to slowly dissolve into space because he had failed in the mini confrontation. Kim was surprised and, after a moment, realized that it was just a fake and not a real opponent. He was amazed that the opponent looked very realistic, and behind him was the clown again. However, the rotating light immediately signaled danger, so he quickly turned around and attacked the enemy. Realizing that he was facing another fake, he decided to keep track of them and concluded that there were 4 more opponents. By destroying the fake mirages one by one, he managed to identify the real enemy clown standing in front of him. Coming face to face, he said that he had no more fake friends left and that they could measure their strength one-on-one. Kanshin was the name given to the state in which the human body became completely possessed by a spirit. This allowed shamans to completely borrow the power of the spirit through a state of conscious trance. However, not everyone could use Kanshin, only those who were able to see spiritual beings. According to statistics, such people were 1 in 10,000. In a standard situation, when a demon entered an ordinary person, their mind gradually began to cloud and lose itself. The only thing that could prevent such consequences was a spiritual essence. However, this was not the main condition, because it was also necessary to be able to control the demonic essence of the spiritual essence. Shamans trained for many years to achieve such complete control, while Kim learned it during the confrontation. The clown did not understand how a mere vessel for a god could learn and develop his abilities so quickly. Kim stood and laughed, realizing that his opponent was probably afraid of his attacks, so he just stood there and did not attack. Dukshin, in Kim Tae-sun's body, felt very comfortable because he now had the opportunity to demonstrate his powers. The clown was confused and could not understand why the young man was still on the side of Hwan Han, who wanted to create true evil. Kim just looked at his opponent and said that some time ago, he had really annoyed him a lot. Then he took a large bill out of his pants pocket and asked what it was. The clown replied that it was just money and still did not understand why his opponent had chosen the wrong side. Kim said that when he was only 10 years old, his parents abandoned him, so he did not want to hear anything about the wrong choice. At that time, he had to choose his own path in order to simply survive in this cruel world, and only money became his true friends at that time, not the living people who hurt him. And now his plan was to get a whole billion friends because Horan had made him that promise. Kim Tae-sun explained that he was completely and utterly ready to listen to him, but he warned that he would still choose money. He did not understand why his opponent was so stupid as to agree to represent the side of evil just for money. Kim only laughed in response and said that if he fulfilled all the conditions, he would be able to get 1 billion won. Then the clown decided to use the technique of earth dexterity to launch a new attack on his opponent. The elder, who was watching closely, realized that the reconciliation had once again turned into confrontation. Chin Song said that in any case, he did not plan to let this man live and still planned to take his soul. Kim Tae-sun understood that he felt very powerful and had a lot of strength, but the god in his body had not yet awakened. The general of the world said that the god would not have time to awaken inside him because he would take his soul completely. Meanwhile, the general's wife understood that the last minutes of her life had come and that she had lost after all. She understood that everything should not have been this way because she had worked very hard for 8 years to become stronger. Hwa Ryung-han replied that all this time she had been alone and searching for her inspiration and motivation. Then, the general's wife said that she could take her soul and take revenge because that was Chang Sung's will. Hwern-han approached her, opened her fan, and said that none of that mattered anymore. The elder sensed that something very strange and inexplicable was happening. Suddenly, they all began to cry bitterly because they realized that their wife had been killed and sent to eternal rest. The clown was confused and did not understand what had happened and why Chan-sin had suddenly started crying. Kim Tae-sun was also confused and did not understand what had happened and why the General of Peace had started crying. The clown decided to take advantage of the situation and used the chief clown's technique of rushing. He also decided to use the technique of hidden confrontation in the form of lightness of the earth to attack his opponent. Dukshin laughed and said that this would no longer work on him because he understood that there were only 5 of them. He immediately began to count the clowns, not understanding why 1/5 of the clowns was missing. Looking around, Dukshin realized that he couldn't find the 5th clown because he had simply disappeared somewhere. At the same time, the clown himself used a secret escape technique and was already directly behind his opponent. Kim was confused and did not understand how his opponent could so easily turn into sand and change his location. Thanks to the great clown's skill, he was able to easily attack his opponent, who could not catch his movements. In this way, he managed to deliver a series of blows to his opponent in order to increase his chances of victory. Kim spun in the air and did not understand how this could be possible. The clown used his puppet dummy to deliver a double blow to his opponent. He attacked the vessel for the god several times in order to defeat him. Kim Tae-sun began to feel worse and did not understand how he should behave in such a situation. The great clown decided to use the 5-fold attack technique to inflict maximum damage. Kim couldn't block this type of attack because he wasn't familiar with it yet and flew headfirst through a long distance. The clown stopped with a smile and told the elder that everything had gone perfectly and that he was indeed finished. However, to his great surprise, Dukshin gritted his teeth and said that he had deliberately allowed his opponent to damage him. Gaining momentum in his speed, he decided to use the fiery technique of demonic damage. The clown realized that the young man was truly worthy of becoming a vessel for the god and activated the technique of the 3 great clowns. Wearing a clown mask, he began to activate his powers by forming one of the brothers. This technique was called Selpan, and a huge number of different types of weapons began to appear around him. Selpan was a game in which the clown touched the ground with both hands and demonstrated his skills. The rules of the game were that if a person did everything right, he would remain alive. The clown was very determined because he had no intention of losing to the vessel of God today. Little Kim Tae-sun was sleeping in his bed and had no idea what was going on. At some point, he woke up because he heard his mother doing something and crying bitterly. His mother told him that she wasn't crying and that everything was fine, so she asked him to go back to sleep. Kim knew that his mother never cried for no reason, so he decided to ask her what had happened or where she was hurting. She told him that she had just seen a ghost, which had frightened her a little, and asked him to go back to sleep. The next morning, his mother was no longer at home, and he realized that the world was insignificant and cruel to him. All of this became unnecessary for him, so he promised himself never to look back again. The clash between Dukshin and Salpan's powers was grandiose in its power and emanating rays. The clown and Dukshin felt serious tension as their powers met face to face. The clash was very powerful, and everything around them began to glow with a huge light. The students, under the influence of the spirits of possession, stared out the school windows as if spellbound. Clown stood on top of the mountain of weapons and said that today, everything should end once and for all. He was sure that this was the only way the vessel for the god would completely disappear and never reappear. However, to his great surprise, his opponent suddenly grabbed him by the chest from the mountain of weapons. Dukshin was furious and replied to his opponent that today it was he who would lose his life, not someone else. The clown was confused and did not understand how this could be possible and how he could have passed this game. Dukshin used his huge fist and forcefully attacked his opponent's face in order to completely destroy his mask. The shockwave created a white cloud of dust, and the clown did not understand how his opponent could do all this after such damage. Dukshin laughed and said that it did not matter to him how things really were. The clown smiled and said that he would never give up so easily in his life, so he asked his opponent not to even dream about it. He decided to demonstrate his strongest ability as the clown Kotba, which was astonishing in its power. The elder finished his preparations and announced that they had no time left, so he asked the clown to step aside. Changing his face to the third one, Chanson announced that he would gladly deal with the enemy himself. Then he ordered all the demonic ghosts to return directly to the general so that he could be filled with power. The spirits immediately began to leave the students' bodies and obediently returned to their general to fill him with power. Dukshin froze in place because he saw a huge number of spirits flying obediently right over his head. He could not understand what was happening at that moment and how to defend himself against it. He was even more surprised by the reaction of the clown, who said that something impossible was happening. The clown introduced himself as Lee Jamada and said that he would be happy to talk to him if he managed to stay alive. After that, he simply said goodbye to his opponent, while Dukshin was confused and did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, he saw a bright light and did not understand where it was coming from or what it could mean. The amorphous body of the elder began to disintegrate, and a man appeared before them who said that he was tired of this whole performance. Meanwhile, Kavaranhan covered her brother and laughed, saying that it was just a temporary blanket. She understood that the house was completely destroyed, which meant that they would have to stay outside in cramped conditions for a while. After that, she bandaged the box in which her brother was lying and began to prepare for the next steps. Her cloak was also not simple, and a monster lived on the inner lining, which simply ate the box containing the mummy's body. At one point, she turned around because she realized she had felt something very strange. Then she realized that she had felt the general's soul, which meant she had to hurry so as not to be late for the climax. Then she summoned Conchol, who was a huge ghostly dragon, and used him as a means of transportation. She understood that at that moment, She really needed the body of a chicken to realize her personal goals and ideas. Changsen, who was the general of the world, approached the body of the chicken in order to complete all the preparations and attacks. He understood that a god was about to be born very soon, and he would have liked to see it, but he had other plans. Dukshin felt a terrible sense of fear towards his opponent, who stood right in front of him. There was emptiness around him, which was frightening because nothing could be seen at all. Dukshin understood that he had almost managed to defeat that clown and had no strength left to resist. Looking at his opponent, he tried to understand what tactics he needed to use to fight back. At some point, he realized that he was being attacked again by the elder's body, which resembled a wooden statue. Despite his efforts to defend himself from the attack, he was immediately thrown in the opposite direction. These wooden objects were attached to ribbons that resembled silk threads tied around Chansen's neck. Kim understood that he was indeed facing a very strong opponent who possessed enormous power and potential. He understood that he would most likely not be able to withstand the attack because he was already weak and his arm was probably broken. He was facing 3 great leaders, which meant that simply surviving had become an impossible task for him. Chansen said that he wanted to wait until noon to absorb all the divine power, and he had a plan. However, looking at him, he said that he was probably just lucky because he felt that the shaman was already nearby. He understood that even if his power was not great now, he still had to absorb it at all costs. Chansen said that if Dukshin simply surrendered now, he would let him go without any pain. Kim Tae-sun began to run rapidly in the opposite direction, hoping that he would be able to simply wait out this time. He laughed and shouted to the general that he now had the opportunity to do some exercise. However, right in front of him appeared the second great leader, who began to use Changshin's call and release the ghost spirits again. They immediately began to pass through Dukshin's body in order to delay him for a while. Changshin used a portrait attack, and Kim completely lost feeling in his body and could no longer control it. He said that he would not allow the turning lantern inside his body to become stronger, so running away was useless. His ability was to absorb other people's souls, and now the soul of his companion, the general's wife, lived inside him. This meant that he was now one with her soul and could easily expand his power capabilities. Kim was a little scared and watched closely as the enemy's body began to transform. Then he began to take his true form and grew to the size of a real giant. He felt his companion's pain, and tears flowed involuntarily from his eyes as he realized that she was no longer in this world. Wiping away his tears, he said that he would definitely make sure that their dreams came true. Dukshin began to laugh and said that he didn't care and wasn't interested because he didn't want to listen to whining. Changshin was furious and, gathering all the leaders, prepared to attack with the power of the 3 great brothers. Then he aimed the combined log at his opponent to inflict maximum damage. Kim understood that he was under the influence of the previous attack and could not move, which meant he would have to accept it. He stood still and proudly accepted the attack from his opponent because he could not change anything. Changsen was very strong and filled with rage because he understood that he would not be able to absorb the lantern because of his companion's soul. Dukshin found himself on the attacking element, which forcefully carried him in a completely different direction. He was in great pain, and blood began to flow from his mouth because all his internal organs were severely damaged. However, his opponent had no intention of stopping and continued to actively attack his rival. With his next attack, he struck his opponent in the stomach with his huge giant fist. Kim knew that he was in terrible pain and was about to lose consciousness from the pain and damage. Looking into the distance, he suddenly saw himself standing behind the General of Peace. He was very surprised because he saw himself in high school when he became the chief patrolman. Of course, everyone was very surprised at the time, which prompted him to take such action and become a patrolman. It was precisely because he was constantly bullied and harassed that he made the responsible decision to become a patrolman. This gave him power over the bullies and troublemakers, and they got what they deserved. However, our hero understood that what really annoyed him the most were the weaklings who trembled with fear and did nothing. It was all because of one classmate who was always throwing words around without ever thinking about the consequences. In elementary school, he was the one who made fun of Kim Tae-sun at every turn, saying that his mother ran away from him because he was stupid. It was because of the constant daily ridicule that he could not forget the day when his mother actually left him. That was when hatred began to build up inside him, which later grew into strength and anger out of despair. In elementary school, he cried constantly until one day he decided to fight back and felt a wonderful sense of liberation. It was at that moment that he decided to fight back for the first time in his life and never regretted anything again. To his surprise, it was at that moment that he heard words of remorse because the boy began to apologize for his insult. Hearing the apology from his bully, he began to feel real satisfaction with the situation. Kim felt very bad and was unconscious, not understanding what exactly he needed to do next. He did not understand why his strength was completely leaving him and felt as if the demon inside him was filling all the space. Chonsun was a little sad that his opponent did not respond with his fists, but he wanted to end everything as quickly as possible. He said that this was the fate of the young master and his karma for everything that had happened in his life. Kim was thrown aside again, and he realized that his strength was finally beginning to leave him, and it was difficult for him to remain conscious. He understood that karma was the punishment for his past deeds that he had committed over the past 18 years. Karma was most likely for the violence that had driven him all this time, while he was trying hard to simply survive in a cruel world. He understood that someday it would all come to an end, and he would simply reach a dead end with his actions. Kim began to feel sorry for himself because he was already very tired and just wanted to end all his suffering and torment. He was already prepared to simply give up and go with the flow. But at that moment, he saw himself standing in front of him. He didn't understand what was happening to him and thought that he was probably just hallucinating. His high school self said that it wasn't time to give up yet, and that he had to get up and fight for 1 billion. Kim asked him to be quiet because he knew he couldn't beat him, and the future turned out to be much stronger than he was. But the second one said that even when his mom left him, he found the strength to survive and keep living. Kim bowed his head and realized that the word strong could not be associated with him at all now. He understood that in reality, he had only pretended to be strong so that people would no longer look down on him and bully him. It seemed to him that such a position could be excellent for his life path, but now he was just sad. He admitted to himself that he had only pretended to be strong, but in reality, it had all turned out to be too frightening and beyond his capabilities. He understood that if he had money and a good family, he wouldn't have had to pretend, and none of this would have happened. One way or another, his mother wouldn't have left him, and they would have continued walking together on their fateful path. At one point, he even suggested that if he had not been born, his mother might have been happier. However, to his great surprise, he was struck by the realization that he could not even imagine such a thing. His high school self asked him to stop whining and finally come to his senses. He told himself that it was not yet time to give up, and that there were many fateful encounters and decisions ahead. Kim did not understand why he kept talking to himself in such a strange and silly way. The projection put a hand on his shoulder and told him that it would not force him to live on, but that he was not the same person. He said that he had simply borrowed his body and began to transfer his spirit to a completely different space. Kim Tae-sun found himself in the house where he grew up and realized that it was the main beacon of destiny that had been helping him. It was amazing for him to see the house from his childhood because it was too unexpected for him. Walking a little further into the room, he saw his mother sitting over his crib and crying bitterly. Kim Tae-sun saw his mother and his younger self and could not understand how this could be possible. The main lantern approached from behind him and said that this was exactly what his mother looked like right before her disappearance. His mother had formed a certain force that glowed brightly and began to bring it closer to her child's body. This force was the main lantern, an amulet that forced him to live and protected him from danger. She cried bitterly, but her every movement and the warmth of her gaze showed how much she loved her child. His mother asked him for forgiveness and told him that it was not safe for him to be near her, so she had to leave. Kim Tae-sun began to understand that his mother had not abandoned him of her own free will, but because she wanted to protect him. So she decided to protect her child with the main lantern, which decided to show him the truth. Before disappearing, the main lantern told him that it was time to choose between giving up or fighting. Kim Tae-sun looked at him intently because he understood that only he could make the choice and decide. Then he began to understand that the main lantern inside him was there thanks to his mother. He realized that he had learned the whole truth very suddenly and spontaneously, and even felt a touch of irony in it. However, to his great surprise, his mother suddenly asked who was there and asked the spirit to show itself. His mother looked frightened because she did not expect to see a ghost at all, so she looked at him closely. At some point, her maternal instinct kicked in, and she realized that it was her own son, possessed by a ghost, standing in front of her. She noticed that her son had grown too much, and understood that the main lantern was showing her the future. He was very angry, and started shouting that she couldn't even imagine how hard it was for him when she left him alone. However, he didn't have time to finish his sentence, and simply began to disappear, because the time had come to an end. His mother smiled, and said that it was time for him to go back, and that she was sad to see him, but she was happy to see him. Tae-sung cried from the pain that overwhelmed him, and his mother asked him not to cry, saying that they would be able to see each other again. Kim realized that he simply had to survive in order to live a better life than his mother. His mother cried herself, but she said that everything would definitely be wonderful and that she would be happy to see him again. Changsun was confused because his opponent suddenly put his hand forward and prevented another attack. He didn't understand how a man who was just about to die suddenly gained such great power. Little Kim woke up and saw that his mother was crying, so he thought she was in pain. She said she was just scared because she had seen a ghost, so she asked her son not to worry and to go back to sleep. In reality, she was crying because she had seen the birth of a god, for which her son had become the vessel. He believed that if fate helped, they would still be able to meet with his mother so that she could explain everything to him. Changsun couldn't understand what kind of aura surrounded his opponent because he had become very strong and powerful. Carefully examining his opponent, he realized that some ruins had appeared on him, which meant that the god inside him had indeed been born. However, he couldn't understand whether it was a matter of spirit possession or whether he had already become the lord of demons and spiritual beings. Then the main lantern realized that he had managed to save the body he had borrowed, and he was ready to continue the confrontation. Then the main lantern gave him a parting message that he should just continue as before, completely destroying everything in his path with his fists. Changsun did not understand how this could be possible, because he clearly saw how the man in front of him was preparing to leave this world. The main lantern understood that he simply had to completely destroy his life, destroy his destiny, in order to become who he was really meant to be. Changsun was not ready for such a turn of events because he himself was very tired during the confrontation. He simply could not accept the fact that Kim Tae-sun had managed to achieve complete control over his demonic obsession in such a crisis situation. Kim understood that the power that had awakened so quickly was simply intoxicating his mind, and it was a little difficult for him to keep everything under control. Changsun said that he could awaken the god himself because he was a general in the army and possessed great power. However, Dukshin also possessed enormous power and easily attacked his opponent. He himself was thinking about what he should do with the 100 million he was about to receive. Changsun realized that his opponent had been promised a whole billion won for him, and that was just too much. So he activated the third leader to continue attacking his opponent. Using the summoning technique, the statue turned into a huge head that had already opened its mouth. Clenching his fist, Changsun was completely confident that he had now finally defeated his opponent. At that moment, he used several techniques at once that allowed him to turn any creature into a pile of ashes. This is exactly how the deprivation of life from 500 different types and subspecies of the plague appeared. Dukshin simply did not understand what was happening, so he built a protective, fiery space around himself. The leader did not understand what was happening to him because his mouth was completely filled with flames, and it was a very strange feeling. Dukshin used the destructive fire of Tokubi and simply destroyed the mask of the great third chieftain. Changsun was confused and simply could not believe his eyes because his opponent was able to overcome his strongest attack. Dukshin used Tokubi's fist to win as quickly as possible and end this confrontation. All the space around him was filled with the fiery power of the great and incomparable demonic creature. Changsun simply had no strength left, so he could not block or repel such powerful attacks. Dukshin activated the huge Tokubi Fire Fist in order to simply end all his suffering right now. This confrontation had taken a heavy toll on him, and he simply did not want to take part in it anymore. Therefore, he used a special ancient technique called the Tuak Hand, which could destroy anything in its path. Changsun saw Imja in front of him and began to remember their first meeting, which had been a turning point for them. He clearly remembered how, the moment she turned to him for the first time, looking so beautiful, he was ready to throw everything at her feet. Imja's smile became priceless to him because she was a wonderful and very beautiful girl. He asked her to wait because he understood that they would soon be together again, but he was not ready to simply give up. Then, the General of Peace made a firm decision to go all the way and grabbed the head of one of the chiefs. Putting on a mask, he began to recite a mantra for the rapid restoration of strength and the reunification of the spiritual connection between the chiefs. He was ready to go all the way and take the vessel for the god with him as he left. At that very moment, a huge number of chiefs appeared and completely surrounded his main and target enemy. So he called upon the god Paldo Changsong, who was the only conduit from the world of the living to the world of eternal peace and sleep. Kim Tae-sun became alert and looked around carefully to assess the extent of a possible attack. Thus, the Great Spirit of the High Pillar, a powerful being of divine level, was summoned. Tae-sun realized that his opponent had given his life to summon a spiritual being of such level and power. Realizing that at this rate, they could cause great damage to the school, he decided to use Tokebi's hand again. Chung-sin summoned the god Bunsan in order to win this long and difficult battle. The shaman flew actively on her huge dragon in order to arrive in time for the climax of the confrontation. As she flew closer, she was greatly puzzled because she sensed the spirit of the riding pole. Ha Ryung-han understood that this could be very dangerous, so she asked the chick to be patient for a little while. Suddenly, she stopped because everything around her was illuminated by a huge amount of light. She did not understand what could have happened, so she asked her dragon, Conchol, to lift her a little higher to assess the situation. Looking around, she realized that it had taken her too long to get to the appointed place because everything was already over. Chanshin gradually began to disappear and could not accept the fact of his defeat. He looked at his opponent one last time and realized that he truly possessed the power of a god. Before disappearing, Chanshin said that it was not over yet because he had indeed chosen the wrong path. Dukshin had no desire to listen to him and was glad that his opponent had simply blended into the pile of sand. Sitting down on the ground, he began to realize that he had indeed won, but he still did not understand what it was all about. Suddenly, he heard someone call him a chicken again and realized it was the shaman. He was even a little glad that she had come after all, because he had won and wanted to get a lot of money. Varnhan greeted him and said that the confrontation had indeed been difficult, but he had managed to withstand it. His whole body was shaking from fatigue and exhaustion, but he held on and said that it was all nonsense. Varenha examined him closely and realized from his appearance that he had indeed managed to reach the stage of a god-man. She knelt before him and greeted him as the king of all spirits, who had descended to earth to calm the universe. Verena was sincerely happy to welcome the god to this earth and was ready to make every effort to ensure his safe stay. However, to her surprise, Kim asked her not to talk nonsense and simply give him his honestly earned money. The shaman smiled slyly and said that she would definitely give him all the money he was promised because she had completely different plans. Opening the suitcase, our hero really saw a huge amount of money and was simply delighted with this wonderful event. He immediately began to scatter the bills and take a shower of money, realizing that he had undoubtedly become very rich. Kim was thrilled because at 18 years old, he had received 100 million, and the shamaness had said that she had a plan. She had already grown tired of listening to her chick's childish excitement at the sight of such a large amount of money. However, Kim paid no attention to her at all because he was completely busy kissing the money. At some point, he finally came to his senses, apologized, and asked what her plan was. The shaman explained that in the future, there would be many more creatures and people who would want to take his life, so it was necessary to make a plan. Hornha sighed and said that with such great power, he could defeat anyone. That was why she had come up with a completely new plan for further action. Kim said that he was completely out of it and didn't remember what she was talking about, and even admitted that he wasn't listening to her at all right now. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain and realized that Havarena had stabbed him with a blade that went right through him. He didn't understand why she had done this to him, but the shaman smiled and reminded him that she had told him not to love money so much. Dakina's spirit began to leave Kim's body, and he himself was confused. The shaman felt great because she knew that her plan was going exactly as planned. Kim fell to the ground, upset, because he realized that the last minutes of his life had come and he had simply been deceived. The shaman just looked at him and reminded him that when he loved money, his main light went out. Money simply clouded the main light of his life, so he could be in danger. She laughed and said that she had warned him, and since he had forgotten about it, it was his problem. Then she took a huge box out of her cloak, which contained her brother's mummy. She admitted that she had been waiting for this moment for 8 years, and finally, it had come. 8 years ago, on this very day, God was almost born in her brother's body. However, at that very moment, 8 years ago, the shamans tried to prevent his appearance, and so her brother became a mummy. On this very day, her partner, her brother, and the most beloved person on earth simply departed for eternal rest. Untying the bandages on his body, she said that exactly 8 years ago, this man was destined to become a god. In her arms was Domaru, the name of the heavenly lord who possessed such a beautiful body. And now, 8 years later, on Kim's 18th birthday, he had mastered the turning lantern, and the god could finally be born. Laughing, she apologized to him for her lies because she knew that Domaru was the true chosen god of the prophecy. Kim was furious because she had deceived him, but the shamaness just threw the talismans at him, saying that none of it mattered now. She confessed that she had only used him as bait to awaken the soul of a person who shared the same fate. Meanwhile, the clown was walking down the street. He was in a lot of pain, but there was nothing he could do about it. To his surprise, he realized that the energy of the general of the world was no longer felt, and he couldn't believe that the young gentleman had been able to defeat the old man. However, he understood that if the three leaders had opposed him with full force, the young man would not have been able to cope with them. Suddenly, he saw a huge pillar of light in the alley and realized that something bad was happening there. At that moment, his partner ran up to him, very worried about Li Jem and not wanting him to get hurt. The woman with the spiritual essence of a cat did not understand what had happened, but did not want them to get hurt. She understood that her partner looked completely unimportant, but she was even more concerned about the light coming from behind the buildings. Suddenly, a man appeared behind them and told them that they had made a real mess. Looking around, they realized that the deputy head of Shinga, who founded the Divine Arts Clan, had come to them. Looking around, the head of the Divine Arts Association realized that the situation was not what he had been told. Looking at his students, he realized that they would not be able to handle it on their own, but he did not understand why they had kept it all a secret from the organization. On the other hand, he understood that all proceedings should be postponed until another time, and that it was now important to deal with the Pillar of Light. Shinga ordered his students to immediately contact the association to call other shamans so that they could evacuate all civilians. Looking ahead, he realized that the shaman Huaranha was, after all, a very foolish girl. He was very saddened by the realization that the shaman had managed to carry out her plan and try to restore her comrade. Kim was very upset. He did not understand why he had taken part in this ritual, since he had struggled so hard to survive. The shaman laughed and asked him not to take everything so close to heart, because he was only a vessel for the god, so that he could be born. Smiling, she said that she was ready to begin the real ritual to revive Doramu. Suddenly, a hand appeared in front of her. Turning around, she realized that it was Dukshin trying to stop her. She looked at him closely and did not understand what he was planning and why he was ready to go against her. The fiery demonic spirit asked the lady to stop, understanding that everything that was happening was wrong. He understood that it was all for a great cause, but he was sure that they had already gone too far. The demonic creature was convinced that it was wrong to go so far in order to awaken the elder. The shaman didn't even want to listen to him. She simply attacked him in the face. She had spent 8 years becoming stronger and finding ways to restore Dorama. Realizing that one of the creatures was ready to go against her, she ordered her dragon to grab him and hold him until the end of the ritual. She was furious because, having given him the power to help and wake up his brother, she didn't understand why he stood in her. Therefore, considering him ungrateful, she said that he should sit quietly and just watch what was happening. Approaching the chick, she realized that he was already feeling very ill and said that she would gladly help him give up his body and soul. Then she folded her hands and began to chant mantras so that they could leave their bodies and exchange them. The ritual was in full swing. The light began to shine too brightly and completely surrounded the bodies of Kim Tae-sun and Do-Rama. On this day of supreme knowledge, the shaman made offerings to the Lord of the Three Worlds so that he would restore Do-Rama. It was today, here and now, that this man's soul was to be fully awakened. Everything was illuminated with light, and the shaman began to smile joyfully because she realized that her brother was standing before her. The fire demon watched what was happening, understanding that all of this was completely wrong. Kim just lay there and did not understand what was happening to him, but he knew that it was not over yet and that he still had some chances. A soul began to appear before him, and it was Domaru, the shaman's brother. Domaru looked at him intently. He was very powerful, because he was the lord of the whole world. The shaman admitted that she missed him very much and wanted to talk to him about everything again. Kim was tired of listening to their words and said that he would not give up and would not become an object for them. The shamaness began to laugh at him, realizing that in his current state, he could not harm her. Kim did not understand what she meant, but looking around, he realized that he himself had become a ghost. He did not understand why he could no longer feel his body and how he had become a mere ghost. Suddenly, he saw Domaru reaching out his hand toward him, which meant it could be very dangerous. Domaru grabbed him, and Kim began to scream furiously, not understanding what to do in this situation. Varenha continued to laugh, saying that he had lasted even longer than she had expected, and now all that was left for him was to be consumed by Domaru. Kim asked to be released immediately. He just wanted to return to his body. The shaman said that he shouldn't talk in this state and simply said goodbye to him. She watched closely what was happening because she hadn't seen her brother alive for a very long time. At one point, she even felt a little sad because she realized that they would never see the chick again. The shaman remembered that when she first saw him, she was even a little surprised because he and Domaru looked alike. At that moment, she was even a little happy that the body her brother would occupy after so long would not change in any way. That's why she felt a little sorry that she had to do this to the chick, but she saw no other way out. She understood that she simply had to save Domaru and spent all 8 years of her life coming up with this plan. Domaru was holding Kim because he wanted to absorb his main lantern as soon as possible. Kim began to feel very strange. He had the feeling that his consciousness was simply falling apart. His strength was beginning to leave his body, and he understood that now his end had truly come. As soon as he closed his eyes, he immediately saw a projection of himself in high school in front of him. It was a rotating lantern. The rotating lantern told him that he still knew what he had to do and asked him to hurry up so that he could survive. The shaman, Varenha, was very surprised because she felt that the chick's soul had merged with his body. Again, Kim began to feel much better again and even attacked the ghost of his opponent. The shaman screamed at Domaru because she was very worried that her brother would not be able to complete the ritual. However, when she turned around, she realized that the chick was up to something because he ran past her. She understood that Kim was indeed very resilient, but she did not understand what he could do in the state of a ghost soul. However, until the ritual was over, the ghosts had nowhere to go, so running away was simply pointless. He realized that if he could no longer possess his own body, it was worth trying to possess his opponent's body. The shaman was confused and couldn't believe her eyes that the chick had decided to simply deceive her. Kim was glad that the main lantern was telling him that he needed to take Domaru's body immediately. However, the shaman remained completely calm and pretended to be very worried, but in reality, she was not worried at all. Kim Tae-sun paid no attention to her because he had to take his opponent's body as soon as possible. The shaman did not understand how this could be possible, but he was already standing behind her and heading towards Domaru's body. He found it very strange that there was no longer a soul in the body, but it could still move. The shaman said that if he had moved a little faster, he might have succeeded. She explained that when her brother grabbed the chicken, he managed to swallow part of its soul, which is why he could move his hand in his body. Part of Domaru's soul separated, so it simply returned to the body and could control his hand. The shaman was confident in her brother and believes that he would be able to complete the ritual as soon as possible. She was surprised that the chicken's soul clung so desperately to life, and even in such a situation, sought ways to survive. Therefore, she asked him to simply accept his fate and karma and not try to resist. The shaman laughed at the long wait, and finally, it came to an end, and she believed that they would be able to eliminate all those who despised them. She wanted to create their own world as soon as possible, where only evil would rule. The chick realized that something strange was happening, because the enemy's hand suddenly began to guide him toward the body. Varenha was also confused, and did not understand why her beloved brother had decided to act so strangely towards her. Then she decided to turn around and understand why her brother's ghostly soul desperately did not want to end the ritual. The shaman began to cry. She did not understand why he had decided to betray her at such a crucial moment, but he did not answer her because he no longer wanted to talk to the person who had kept his body for 8 years. The chick opened his eyes and saw the shaman sitting over his brother's body, asking him to wake up. She understood at that moment and cried bitterly that they had overcome many obstacles together, but he still did not survive. The shaman remembered how they had agreed to survive together, so she begged her brother not to leave her. Kim looked closely at everything in front of him and realized that it was something strange. Doramu approached him and explained that he was inside his body and that what he was seeing were his last memories. This image was a memory from 8 years ago, when other shamans had taken his life. 8 years ago, he had been with his sister, but the fate they had shared had separated that. The shaman Hwanhyun suffered because she was originally born human, but had undergone 8 rebirths. After all her life trials, she finally met her soulmate, but fate separated them again. She understood that she herself had created these shaman people, and they became her representatives of karma, who separated her from her brother. For this reason, she wanted to start over and build a whole new world so that she could always be with her brother. She wanted to completely erase the illusory world and create a new one, without gods, without people, without anything, where only demons ruled. Then Kim understood what the shaman's true goal was, and why she had changed her priorities. Doramu understood that she had resurrected him by performing a ritual on his soul, and later planned to use his revived power. Before his complete disappearance, Doramu told him that he trusted him to become the master of the body of a heavenly being, and not to make any mistakes. He asked him to help the shaman make the right choice and prevent her from harming herself. Kim Tae-sun understood that a great responsibility had fallen on his shoulders because the Heavenly Lord had asked him to watch over his system. Our hero was furious because he was tired of being constantly used. He simply realized that he now had a new body. The shaman watched what was happening and simply begged Dorama not to leave and not to leave her completely alone in this world again. She saw that her beloved brother was disappearing and did not understand why he had done this to her because she had tried for 8 years for his sake. Dokshin and the dragon were confused themselves and did not understand what was happening. At that moment, the soul of the chick entered the body of the Heavenly Lord and he began to accept himself and his new body. The shaman simply fell to her knees and did not understand why her brother refused to be reborn and return to the world of eternal peace. She had waited 8 years for this day and had gone through hell, so she did not understand why he had done this. At that moment, the chick approached her and began to cough a little to get the shaman's attention. His head hurt very badly because this body did not originally belong to him, and his head was even spinning a little. Looking at the shaman, he began to laugh, saying that the body of her beloved brother now belonged entirely to him. Varnhan was furious. She couldn't understand how he dared to talk to her in the body of her brother, the person most dear to her. That's why she decided to attack him immediately, because she simply couldn't look at him. She laughed because he couldn't even stand properly. She wasn't ready to give up just because he had taken someone else's body. Varnhan was ready to wait for another prophecy, no matter how many years it took or how many times it repeated itself. A huge number of different amulets containing demonic creatures began to fly out of her cloak. She said that the body of a heavenly being was capable of containing more than 1,000 evil spirits. At the same time, she admitted that she had kindly collected all the demonic spirits solely for this day. She was ready to spend all 1,000 different spirits to take the life of the chick. Looking at it one last time, she ordered the spirits to completely destroy the body and bring her only the head. Kim understood that he was in a very dubious situation. But on the other hand, he had the body of the Lord, which meant he had to do something. At that moment, the fiery spirit Dokshin shouted to him that he had a bandage on his arm and that he must immediately tear it off. The shaman Hwanheran was furious that her own spirit, which she had so kindly raised, had also decided to betray her. The fiery demonic creature shouted that the Heavenly Lord's hand held 3 disasters that were in a dormant state. Only by awakening all 3 disasters could the Heavenly Lord's body be protected. Kim realized that his spirit was not deceiving him, and so he immediately reached for the bandage on his right shoulder with his hand. A few moments later, he simply tore off all the talismans on his arm, and then a picture of an eye appeared there. The image of the eye in his hand began to glow, and the evil spirits and ghosts that were directed at him simply disappeared. The demons who served the shaman were confused. They realized that they would not be able to cope with the 3 disasters. The first disaster helped transform the arm into a huge sword that possessed demonic power. The chick began to laugh. He realized that now he had a chance to win because his body was very powerful. The shaman was confused because 8 years ago, these 3 calamities had tried to destroy them, and now they were protecting this body. She understood that initially, she wanted to return this body of the Heavenly Lord intact, but now she simply had no choice. When she summoned stronger spirits that were comparable in power to real gods, Kim Tae-sun, in the body of the Heavenly Lord, was completely confident because the 3 disasters turned out to be powerful. The ghosts immediately headed in his direction, and he himself understood that they were controlled by the shaman. The chick diligently resisted all the ghosts because he wanted to win as soon as possible and just rest. However, at some point, one of the ghosts simply grabbed him with his huge, giant hand. The shaman was confused because she understood that the red dragons and his hand could only belong to one person. The head of the association, Shin-ga, stood behind her and asked her to calm down because she had already caused a big mess. The shaman understood that she had not seen her teacher, who had become the director of the School of Shamans for a very long time. Shin-ga said that he did not think they would meet like this, but she had really crossed the line, and very seriously. He understood that she really harbored a great hatred for them, but he did not think that she would take a child's life. On the other hand, he tried to convey to her that her plan had failed anyway, and that she had achieved nothing. To make his words more convincing, he summoned a huge dragon, a spirit higher than the gods. All the 1,000 spirits she had spent so long gathering began to simply disappear because they were afraid of the huge red dragon. She didn't understand why all this was happening right now because she had suffered for so long to save her brother. Shin-ga said that he was even lucky because there was no guardian spirit among all these spirits, and if there had been, he would not have been able to cope. She realized that she had only one chance to escape, so she summoned her cloak, Huguver, for transportation. The shaman did not understand what the director was planning, but she was sure that he would regret it if they let her go now. She warned that she would definitely return for the body that remained, but a little later, when she became much stronger than she was now. After that, she simply disappeared, and the director of the Shaman Association stared intently at her cloak as it dissolved into space. Shinga even exhaled because he was actually a little scared. He was sorry that she was his opponent. Approaching the child's body, he realized that it was indeed beyond saving. He was surprised that this boy was the owner of the rotating lantern, and at the same time, the only one who had passed into another world. On the other hand, he decided to take another body in order to prevent a catastrophe. Such a decision, made in an instant, was worthy of respect. So he sat down in front of the chick's body and prayed for him to rest in peace. Approaching his old body, Shinga wanted to finish cleaning up, but unexpectedly, he saw a pair of glasses near him. Picking them up, the director was happy because a long time ago, a shaman had stolen these glasses from him. While he was talking to his glasses, the dragon's hand was completely destroyed, and 3 disasters broke out. The spirit of the red dragon was a little confused because he understood that they needed to move back to the association. Kim laughed very loudly because he was already completely possessed by 3 great and destructive disasters. The director decided to put on his glasses, which he had lost long ago, and realized that he would have to tinker with them a bit. The director laughed because he understood that now he had in his hands the body of the Heavenly Lord, in which the power of disaster and the rotating lantern were hidden. Therefore, he was completely ready to confront him because he wanted to lure him to his side. Meanwhile, his students completely blocked the city so that the civilians would be safe. After a while, his students completely rescued the civilians and ran to assist their director. Shinga was a little surprised that his students had come after all, and the body of the Heavenly Lord was once again sealed with amulets. The students were a little surprised because Shinga asked them to take care of the body of the Heavenly Lord and remove the child's body. The assistants immediately began carrying stretchers to check on the injured and organize an evacuation at the school. So on the day of his 18th birthday prophecy, Kim Tae-sun received not money as a gift, but the body of the Heavenly Lord and a lot of problems. The body of the Heavenly Lord was very powerful because it could contain several spirits and control their possession. Thus, not just a god was born, as was said in the prophecy, but a completely new being was born. After a while, Kim regained consciousness and could not understand where he was and what had happened. At that moment, Shinga approached him and noticed that the young man had finally regained consciousness. He asked him not to worry and sat down on a stool near his bed, informing him that they were in a hospital. The director looked at him closely and said that he was glad to meet the new owner of the body of the Heavenly Lord. Kim asked for a mirror to look at himself because his face now looked a little strange. The director said that he had been unconscious for about a month, but Kim still felt uncomfortable looking at his new face. Shinga explained that he had been unconscious for a long time because he had used the power of the 3 disasters that was sealed in his new body. Therefore, he asked him not to remove the talismans from his hands, because they had to work hard to seal the power back into his body. The director asked Namogu to cut an apple, because he understood that after such a long period, he must have been very hungry. The man peeled the apple and placed it on a plate, saying that he could eat while he listened carefully instead of talking. Who were they? And why did they care about him? What was their plan for this body? All these questions were in Tae-sun's head. The director decided to introduce himself and said that he was the director of the State Organization of Shamans, Musinwan. He also said that now there were no more records of Kim Tae-sun in this world, and the body of the heavenly ruler now belonged entirely to their organization. In other words, Shinga explained that he was now under the complete protection of the Association of Shamans, which was very large. Kim thought for a moment and decided to ask what exactly had happened to the shaman who had taken his life. Then the director asked the head of Namgun to show the video recording stored on his tablet. After turning on the video, he immediately handed the tablet to the body of the Heavenly Lord so that he could see what was there. Kim was a little surprised because it was a video message from the shaman Nuna. In the video, the shaman greeted all her subscribers and expressed her regret that they had not seen each other for a very long time. Hwanhyun told her subscribers that she was in a very bad mood because she had a plan, but it didn't work. She even admitted that she was furious because one chick completely ruined all the plans she had been working on for 8 years. To distract herself a little, she decided to launch new content. Kim held his tablet carefully in his hands and watched her video message. In it, she said that this world had long annoyed her and she wanted something interesting to happen. After that, she showed a huge number of amulets and said that she was releasing all the spirits she had collected over many years. she scattered them from the roof of the building. Nuna said that now it didn't matter whether people believed in ghosts or not. In this way, she wanted to completely turn this world upside down so that ghosts would consume people and begin to rule the world. So the world they knew and were accustomed to had to change because the ghosts were now free. As a small bonus, the shaman showed black talismans in which truly terrifying demonic creatures were sealed. Among these creatures were the Peakdew Mountain Demon Brothers, who were very powerful. The nine-tailed fox also shared the principles of Huanhan's shamanistic beliefs, and so they were ready to take her side. Among these spirits was Peimu, who was one of the 4 divine beasts and symbolized a turtle with a snake. The shaman said that these great demons and demonesses would now truly rule the world of humans. All those who would be consumed by these ghosts would soon become hers, and she would create her new world of humans. The shaman was confident that in this way, she would be able to completely destroy and change the world ruled by fools. Kim watched the video and did not understand what it was, but the director explained that the video had appeared the day after he fell asleep. So while he was unconscious for a whole month, spirits spread throughout the world and now directly interfered in people's affairs. The director explained that initially, the shaman wanted to attack only them, but now her actions had become unpredictable and wrong. Shinga admitted that they had decided to train the body of the Heavenly Lord so that he could help them deal with this chaos in the future. He apologized for presenting him with a fait accompli and leaving him no choice, but hoped that he would think carefully and make the right decision. Kim understood everything they told him and decided to clarify where the 100 million he had earned by risking his own life had gone. The director adjusted his glasses and said that these funds had been deemed illegal and their source questionable. So after an investigation, they had been taken by the state. He couldn't understand how the state and the shaman associations could do such a thing and take his honestly earned money. Lowering his head, he began to analyze everything that had happened and what he had just seen and heard in order to make a choice. The director asked him not to be sad, because he had done something much more valuable than this money and would be able to earn a lot more. Shinga asked the Lord to forget about all this because he now had completely different goals and tasks. However, Kim simply threw the tablet at the director, not understanding what he was talking about because he did not want to take part in all this. Taesong was furious because he had lost his money and therefore did not understand why he needed the common good. The assistant director was furious. He couldn't understand how such a healthy man could cry like a child over some money. However, to everyone's surprise, he said he was ready to tear off the bandage they had been struggling with for so long so that they could suffer again. He admitted that he was very tired of everyone trying to use him because he wanted to live his own life. Taesong was not interested in listening to stories about obsessed rulers and everything else. He just wanted to get his money. The assistant director realized that they were in a dangerous situation, so he immediately stood up for him, actively tearing the bandage off his arm. He said that they would never control him because it was not in his interests. However, as soon as he tore off the bandage, nothing happened, and he did not understand why everything was so strained. Everyone present was confused and also did not understand why the 3 disasters did not activate. Kim looked at his arm, didn't understand why nothing was happening, and asked them to do something. His opponent stood there, confused, and looked at him, because they were even curious to watch this. At that moment, the director wiped the blood that was flowing from his mouth and just smiled. Kim waved his arm vigorously and did not understand why the 3 disasters did not help protect his heavenly bodies. The director laughed and said that he understood why he had managed to ruin the shaman's plans, then rolled up the sleeve on his arm. Showing the seal on his arm, he said that he had changed the method of sealing the 3 disasters in order to protect those around him. Thus, if he broke the seal only on his arm, the burden would fall on the body of the second guardian. But the director was already feeling unwell. Kim was furious and did not understand why they had deprived him of such powerful protection. The assistant director immediately tried to calm him down so that they could continue the conversation. The director sat him down and began to place a protective seal on his hand, asking him to sit still and calm down. So, with the help of an exorcism spell, the seal was reimposed on Tesson's hand to prevent the 3 disasters from escaping. Shinga laughed and said that if he tried to remove the seal again, it would tighten even more, causing him pain. Wiping his mouth with a napkin, the director said that this body was very expensive and he did not want it to be damaged by careless actions. Kim was still furious that he was not ready to accept everything that was happening. The director asked him to calm down, and Kim asked how much the body was worth and why everyone was protecting it so much. However, when he heard that the body of the Heavenly Lord could be worth about 100 million won when converted into money, he immediately pulled himself together. 100 million won was a huge amount for Kim, of course, so he immediately decided to to change his tactics. He thought that the old man had simply decided to cheat him, which was why he had quoted such a high price. The director explained that a vessel that could hold any number of spirits appeared only once every few million years. Therefore, pointing to the body of the Heavenly Lord, he asked Kim Tae-sun to be more careful with the vessel that was so expensive. Kim even lost consciousness from the realization that the body he was now in could be worth such a huge amount of money. The director laughed because he understood that now the Heavenly Lord had become much more obedient. So Shin-ga sat down next to him and said that they could talk in a more relaxed atmosphere. He explained that they did not want to use him for their evil purposes, so he wanted to tell him something important. Looking closely at the Heavenly Lord, he said that he knew a lot about Kim Shindo, who was his real mother. Kim was very surprised and did not understand how the old man could know his mother's name. Shin-ga smiled and said that he not only knew her name, but they were quite close because his mother was his shamanism companion. Kim was very surprised that his mother was one of them, although he remembered that she was a shaman. Shin-ga said that his mother was a shaman like all of them, but one day she left the association and he was born. Kim thought about it because he became very interested in finding out what exactly had happened to his mother and where she was now. Shin-ga said that if he wanted to obtain such valuable and meaningful information, he had to join the association and help them. By joining the association, he could find out information about his mother and also confront the shaman who had taken his life. Shin-ga said that a guy with a rotating lantern in his soul and the body of a heavenly lord was a very rare and valuable find. Thus, Kim Tae-sun got a second chance at life, and after that, nothing would be the same, so he would have to live without regrets. Lowering his hand, the director said he hoped the young man would make the right choice. The assistant director was confused because he understood that the young man could try to attack them again. Namga did not understand why the director had begun to trust him so much and was in such a hurry because he had not yet given an answer and could tear off the bandage again at any moment. Shin-ga smiled, realizing that the young man would not do so again because he had previously been on the disciplinary committee. Kim thought for a moment and said that he really had no choice where to go. So he decided to try living with the shamans he disliked so much. Besides, he simply had no alternative because there would be no second chance. Looking closely at the director's face and the aura that emanated from him, he realized that if he refused, they would simply take his life. Kim understood that if he attacked the director now, he would achieve nothing but a meaningless loss of life because his opponent was strong. Right now, all he could do was follow his words, so he understood that he would have to become a shaman and live with them. Kim promised himself that he would never again allow himself to be broken, as had happened that time when the shaman had unexpectedly taken his life. Vinny held out his little finger to the director and asked him to promise that they would really help him. When the deal was completely sealed, he invited his assistants so that they could begin preparations. Tessin brought him his belongings from his past life that he could use and informed him that the exit formalities would soon be ready. Kim agreed with everything the director said and said he was ready to go to the Shaman Association's territory. The assistant director was surprised that, as always, he was able to resolve everything with a simple conversation, but he did not understand why such a high price had been set. The director did not say anything, but in his heart, he understood that the body of the great heavenly lord was worth much more. His assistant, Namga, feeling a little confused, decided not to pay attention to it. However, to his surprise, Kim suddenly turned around and decided to address him because he had some questions. He said that he would like to get a haircut because he was starting a new life and wanted to tidy himself up. The director agreed and said that as soon as he changed his clothes, he would be taken to the barbershop. Kim showed the barber a photo of himself when he was in high school and asked for the same hairstyle. Realizing that his hair color was completely different, Kim also asked the barber to dye his hair. He understood that even though it wasn't his body, from that moment on, it was his life. After that, they put him in a car and drove to the Shaman Association's territory where other students lived. The Shaman Association was a fairly large building, and there were also educational and residential buildings on the territory. Kim looked around and realized that this was now going to be his new home for the foreseeable future. At one point, he even began to smile because he realized that he needed to forget the past and start living in the present. The assistant director accompanied Kim and said that a final decision about his fate had not yet been made. So he asked him to behave properly and not say anything unnecessary about his body. Kim said that this school was not so different from a regular school and that he had expected something a little different. The assistant principal said that the schools were a little different after all because his classmates would be real shamans. Vinny entered his classroom and saw that there were many students of different ages there. Taoism in shamanism is a concept associated with the higher spiritual forces of Taoist cosmology and shamanic practices. This concept was often associated with divine beings, heavenly forces, and the highest form of enlightenment. One of the students was simply sleeping at the back of the classroom and did not even notice that a new student had arrived. Namga asked everyone to pay attention and said that he had brought the new student he had mentioned earlier and asked them to get acquainted and establish a relationship. He introduced himself and said that he was pleased to meet them, after which he offered to be friends. Everyone looked with interest at the new shaman, who had not even performed a ritual. They had heard that he had been accepted on the recommendation of the principal. The others did not understand how a non-hereditary shaman could even get into such a school. Kim was delighted because he had only just entered the classroom and already everyone hated him and was talking about him behind his back. The assistant director took a tablet to see who the new student's roommate in the dormitory was. Then he realized that his new roommate was supposed to be Sen, so he asked to show the new student his room. The assistant director asked to accompany the new student with his belongings, show him around the school, and explain how everything worked. The boy sitting next to him nudged him and said that the teacher had told him to quickly show the new student his room and asked him not to daydream. Sion understood that he would have to take on the big responsibility of accompanying the new student to his room and helping him carry his things. Another student who remained seated at his desk asked his assistant to time how long it would take him to return. Kim looked at Son and asked him to follow him so they could walk to the dormitory. As they walked through the school corridors, they were both silent because the new student didn't know what to talk about. At one point, he decided to approach his roommate to find out how things worked. He greeted him, but the boy was a little scared because he didn't expect such a mature and tall student. Kim said that he felt awkward and that if he was going to say hello, he should introduce himself properly. So he asked the boy to introduce himself. Sean was still scared, but said he was 18 years old and was really happy to meet him. Kim said he was also 18 years old and was very happy to meet him, suggesting they talk to each other and be friends. He also decided to find out why the shamans were so negatively disposed towards him, because he wanted to understand how he could befriend them. His new friend lowered his head because he understood that everything was completely different at the shaman school. Kim didn't understand that to become a shaman, you had to do something special, or that they only taught those who had a lot of money. His neighbor said that he had been at the school before, and that it was better not to attract too much attention to yourself there. He explained that the shamans who studied there had been training practically since birth, so they didn't like newcomers who had simply gotten in through connections. After they entered the room, Kim was surprised that it was a dormitory because it looked like a real 3-room apartment. After showing Kim Tae-sun to his private room, he said that he could unpack all his things, after which they had to return to class. Kim thought that maybe this room could be nicely renovated, but his neighbor decided to hurry him up. Son was very sorry, but asked him to hurry because he had some business to attend to, as he had received a message from Jahan. Kim was surprised and didn't understand what business could be waiting for him, so he said he would just unpack his things and asked him to wait a little. Kim understood that his neighbor was often bullied because he was very polite and afraid of everything, like a puppy being teased. Rewinding the fragments in his memory, he realized that his classmates often bullied him because he couldn't fight back or stand up for himself. On the other hand, he remembered the words of the principal, who asked him to keep quiet and not draw attention to himself. So it was none of his business. Therefore, he decided to just live here until he could get enough information from his mother about what was going on. Unexpectedly, he realized that his hand had suddenly caught fire, which seemed very strange to him. Waving his hand in different directions, he did not understand what had happened and why his hand had decided to surround itself with flames. At some point, he managed to shake off the spiritual being. Looking closely, he realized that it was Dukshan. Kim was surprised and did not understand how he could be on his body or how this could have happened at all. He didn't understand what it was and thought that he was looking at the son of the very demon of fire. He didn't understand how the spirit that served the shaman Havaranhan could be here and thought that he wanted something. Dukchin asked him to listen and give him time to explain everything, because in fact, it wasn't like that at all. The day he tried to help him, he lost all his strength and almost disappeared completely. However, at the moment when the young man was grabbed by the huge red hand of the dragon, he decided to transfer part of himself. Therefore, with his last ounce of strength, he broke free from the other dragon in order to enter the young man's body and hide there. Dukshin said that, in reality, he did not serve the shaman, but was completely under the control of the master of this body, the heavenly lord. However, only during the ritual did he realize that Kavarena had gone too far and crossed all boundaries, and he tried to save him. Kim said that he did not care about all these excuses, so he asked to get straight to the point and asked why he was needed. He explains that on that day, his brother had chosen him, so now he had to serve him. At the same time, he understood that Daramu would be reborn, but he chose the chick anyway, which meant that this was his will. He explained that he had lost a lot of his strength that day, which is why he looked like a child, but he still retained his essence. At that moment, Kim started banging on the door, asking his roommate to call people because there was a demon pretending to be a child. The fiery demon began to lunge at Kim and asked him to just help him because he simply had nowhere else to go. At that moment, his dorm neighbor peeked in the door to see what was going on. Kim smiled and said that he had indeed come at the right time because there was a ghost here, but his neighbor simply couldn't see it. His friend asked the new student to hurry up because they were already very late. Kim apologized and said that they had nothing else to do, so he could go with him. However, his new friend looked very strange and said that he just couldn't take it anymore. Kim was confused and didn't understand what was happening to Sen, his new friend, because he looked very strange. At that moment, his classmates came into the dorm room and started calling for Hansen. Jahen said that he had sent him several messages telling him to hurry back to class. He smiled and said that he would have to answer for ignoring his messages. He looked very depressed and did not understand why he was again to blame for something he had not done. However, his classmate laughed at him, saying that he had promised to come soon, but had broken his promise. The young man began to apologize to Jahen, saying that he was truly ready to accept his guilt. However, Hansen said that he was not interested in listening to all this and simply snapped his fingers. At that moment, the boy began to transform into a monster and screamed loudly in pain and fear. Kim did not understand what was happening to his new friend and roommate in the dormitory. Dukshin suggested that at that moment, there were many different evil spirits inside the young man, which is why he could not cope with them. When he saw that there were indeed several talismans on his shoulder that turned him into some kind of centipede, Kim was surprised. The fire spirit explained that the boy had been forced to take in many spirits that did not suit him, which is why he looked that way. He turned to the newcomer and asked why he was looking at all this so strangely, since there was nothing unusual about it. He asked him not to look at them so strangely, because this was just how they entertained themselves among friends. At that moment, his new friend's appearance returned to normal, and it really did look strange. Jahen said that they had agreed to go to the dining room together, but he had broken his promise and did not understand why he had done so. The boy immediately began to apologize, but the other asked him not to apologize and to explain why he was late. The young man explained that he was just waiting for the newcomer to finish unpacking his things, and then they were going to go to the dining room together. But it took a long time. Then the class leader realized that they were late precisely because the newcomer took too long to unpack his things. Kim looked at them in surprise and didn't understand what he had to do with it, since he wasn't the one responsible for this situation. Then the leader looked at the newcomer and asked why he had delayed his friend and caused him problems since he had only just arrived. Sean tried to explain that he didn't mean it that way and didn't want the new kid to have problems on his first day. However, the so-called friend looked at him and asked him not to interrupt. Otherwise, evil spirits would enter him again. He himself said that in any case, they couldn't go to the dining room because of the newcomer, which meant that he had to answer for his actions. Kim remained silent, and his spirit did not understand why he was silent and just watched and endured while they picked on him. He understood that he could not just stand by and watch his own friends being bullied because it was very strange. That is why, as a new heavenly ruler who possessed such a body, he had to fight injustice. However, to the surprise of everyone else, Kim apologized and said that they had indeed gone too far and prevented him from going to the dining room. Then he approached Son and asked why he had set him up so badly on his first day of school. He shouted that he had to get to the cafeteria quickly because they hadn't had breakfast yet and needed to move fast. Jahen started laughing loudly, realizing that Kim was really very strange, and said that he probably just misunderstood everything. Kim said that he still needed to go to the cafeteria, so as a sign of reconciliation, he was ready to heat up the buns at their expense. Jahen said that he would have to apologize because he didn't understand the situation, so he said that they would all eat together because he was treating them. After that, he handed his card to Sen and asked him to buy some food from the list and then bring it to the classroom. He explained that they were hungry, so this time they needed to get more food and not be late. Sean took the bank card and said he understood everything and would quickly run to the cafeteria. The other students noticed that Kim had a very cool body, but he replied that it was just genetics. As they headed towards the classroom, Dukshin tried to understand why Kim was acting so strangely. He didn't understand why the Heavenly Lord had decided to befriend such obvious bullies who broke the rules of conduct at school. He didn't understand why Kim was sucking up to the bullies who were clearly tormenting the boy Sion. He understood that he had seen this boy's past and therefore knew better than anyone else how to be in the boy's position. But for some reason, he didn't stand up for him. Kim simply stopped paying attention to them and said that he was not at home and would now do everything according to his own rules. In fact, Taesung had already come up with and implemented his own plan, so he just wanted to follow it. The students began to ask him how he was able to enroll in a school for shamans, especially since he had attended a regular school. Jahan found it very strange that the principal personally brought him here, even without any family connections, because this had never happened before. Kim knew he didn't know how to answer, because he couldn't talk about the fact that he had the body of a heavenly lord. All of his classmates were more concerned that there were no teachers in the classroom because they were busy with Hwang Hae-dan, who had released evil spirits. Because of her actions, it had been a month of complete chaos, and the atmosphere was not the best because the students were left to their own devices. Kim pretended that he knew nothing about it and said that whatever happened there sounded very serious. However, the class president was surprised that he knew nothing about the shaman because the principal himself had brought him to the school. Taesung began to ask him to help him at school because he had no idea what exactly he should pay attention to. Jahan was a little confused because he didn't know what rules he should tell him about. Then he pointed to Kyumgan-san and said it was best to stay away from him because he was out of his mind when he was woken up. After a while, Sayan returned to the classroom and told Jahan that he was already there. He was carrying a lot of bags and said that he had bought everything on the list he had received from them. His classmates began to laugh and praise Sean because this time he had actually arrived on time. Kim looked at the contents of the bags with interest because, in his opinion, there was too much food. It seemed a little strange to him that there was so much food and in such large quantities. Taesung decided to clarify whether they were sure they had only bought what they needed because there was really too much food. Xion said that he had bought everything on the list in the chat, and his classmate said that she had just sent such a long list as a joke. Jahan understood that his classmate certainly hadn't spent his own money, but there was still too much food. Then he smiled and said that since he had to apologize, Taesun had to eat everything on the table. Kim picked up a sandwich and said that no matter how you looked at it, there was too much food for one person. Jahan laughed and said that Sayan wanted to feed him so badly that he probably brought so much food. He said that the food had already been bought and that they needed to start a warm welcome for his transfer to a new school. Kim watched them silently because he understood that it was all just a provocation. Sitting down at his desk, he said that he was not a food fighter, so he could not eat so many delicacies. Taesung said that they should all eat together, not just him, and that such jokes were very cruel. The students said that no matter how he denied it, they were simply not interested in listening to all this. Jaehyun grabbed one of the burgers and said that he didn't like it when people turned up their noses at food that had been kindly bought for them at his expense. Sean himself was very surprised and didn't understand what could happen next. Suddenly, a burger flew straight at his face, and he didn't understand what it was. Sean was confused because Kim, for some reason, threw a bun at him, which smashed right into his face. The other students became interested again because they realized that the performance was in full swing. Kim looked closely at the class leader to understand his reaction to such strange actions. However, Jahan did not react because he did not understand why the new kid in class suddenly started ignoring him. Sean understood that today was just a special day because he was grabbed again and they were preparing to attack him. He began to apologize to Jahan and asked him to let him go because he had bought everything strictly according to the list and did not mean any harm. Jahan was no longer listening to him and told him to just grit his teeth because he had decided to attack him directly in the face. He said that since his arrival, he had done nothing but help him, so he did not expect such strange gratitude. Sean covered his face with his hands and tried not to cry from the pain because he understood that he simply could not change anything. The other students in the class thought that Jahan probably needed to be stopped, but decided to just watch for now. Kim realized that the real show was yet to come, so he decided to just sit back down at his desk. He unwrapped one of the rolls and decided to just eat because at some point he got bored. Dukshin didn't understand why Kim just sat and watched his neighbor being bullied and found such behavior very strange. He believed that the young man was simply unworthy of becoming the owner of the body of the Heavenly Lord. But Kim simply finished his meal. Throwing away the hamburger wrapper, he headed towards his new opponent to clarify the situation. With a slight movement of his hand, he stopped Jahan in order to interrupt his attacks on the unfortunate Sen. Jahan did not understand why he allowed himself to behave this way and told him to let go of his hand. Kim said that they were supposed to be friends and that attacking each other was not quite normal or right. Letting go of his hand, he said that such behavior was too much for a display of friendly love. San was already feeling very bad and didn't understand why his new roommate had suddenly decided to stand up for him. And Kim couldn't understand why. When their classmate was being attacked, they just sat there and watched calmly. He said that at their school, such behavior was severely punished. But for shamans, this was apparently what true friendship looked like. One of the students was ready to attack Kim Tae-sun just because he dared to open his mouth and speak. Jahan said that it had always been this way, and that these were rules that had been established at the shaman school long ago. However, Kim said that it all looked like a lot of fun, so he wanted to take part too. He looked at Son and said that the guy just had a talent for setting people up, so he wanted to join in. Jaehoon was confused because he didn't expect to see and hear such a reaction from the new student. Kim took a burger and said that he would gladly eat all the food to apologize and become their friend. He said that he already liked this place very much, so he asked them to start being friends as soon as possible. Jaehoon started laughing and said that he would agree to be friends with him if he really ate everything down to the last bite. Kim was delighted and convinced that from that moment on, they had truly become friends. Unexpectedly, he attacked Jaehoon because he realized that they were now friends. Jaehoon did not expect such a turn of events and was confused because he did not understand why he was being attacked. The other students were also confused and did not understand how it happened that Jaehoon was attacked so easily. Sean himself did not understand what had happened because it all seemed very strange to him. Kim smiled and said that he was just joking, and that he was very happy that they could attack their friends. The class leader's friend decided to attack the newcomer, but Kim beat him to it, and, attacking with his elbow, said that he would also be happy to be friends with him. Kim's attacks were very strong, so the other students simply couldn't block his attack. Sean stood there, confused, and didn't understand what he was supposed to do now because everything that was happening was very strange. Kim approached him and said that he didn't understand how he could have become an outcast in such a class. He said he was willing to give him a choice: stay with those jerks or become friends with him and change his status. Kim said that real friends simply shouldn't behave that way, so he decided to intervene because he couldn't stand to watch it anymore. On the other hand, Kim said that if he liked being constantly attacked, he could continue to be friends with these strange people. Son was confused, and his roommate continued to say that he was ready to provide him with a normal school life. Chisan looked very scared because behind Kim was an enemy ready to attack. Kim turned around and was a little surprised because he saw the large, long legs of a centipede. The long legs of the centipede grabbed him and pinned him down. Kim didn't understand what it was or why it looked that way. It seemed very strange to him and reminded him more of some kind of disgusting creature, so he suddenly felt uncomfortable. The centipede's tentacles also grabbed Sina, who screamed because he was scared and overwhelmed with horror. Jaehoon entered a state of possession by a giant centipede, which was strong and had chitinous armor. He was completely confident in his victory, saying that such weaklings would not be able to resist him under any circumstances. Kim was confused because it was so strange, and he did not know how to behave in such a situation. His opponent laughed and did not understand why they froze and did not move, apparently only now realizing that something was wrong. The other students tried to stop their classmate and said that possession was completely forbidden in class. However, he said that there were no adults here anyway, so it didn't matter because no one could check whether he had used possession or not. He said that those who hope to study in such a class of shamans through connections should receive severe punishment. The students understood that they should have stopped their classmate earlier, but they chose to be observers and therefore decided to remain on that side. Kim Tae-son laughed because his opponent had finally shown his true colors. He said that, as expected, his intuition had not failed him because he immediately understood that he was dealing with a bad person. The Heavenly Lord believed that showing who was in charge here by using force alone was very low and despicable, so it annoyed him greatly. Kim said that he would definitely respond with his own attack, but first, he wanted to hear the answer from his roommate. Son was confused. He didn't understand how he should behave in this situation because he had known his classmates for a long time. Kim repeated his question. Was he ready to become his friend? Or would he continue to grovel before these stupid people? He understood that he was afraid because the friendship was being offered by a newcomer to the class, while he had known his classmates for a long time. Kim said that he had also been an outcast before, but one moment changed everything when he showed his teeth. He smiled and said that only his own will could change his current fate. Sean thought about it and didn't understand how his will could change anything in the current situation because he was really scared. He didn't understand what he had to do and remembered how one of his close friends had told him that he had to survive. John Hen said that they talked too much and shouldn't act important when they were in his power. At some point, he became curious about what would happen if he made his opponent his colleague, and he would just keep chatting smugly. Kim started shouting and said that his neighbor had to make up his mind because he simply wouldn't have another chance. Chisan looked at him intently and remained silent, not knowing how to respond. At one point, tears welled up in his eyes, and he asked for help, saying that he was ready to change. Kim was happy to get his consent, after which he immediately summoned a demonic fire creature to assist him. His opponent, Jaehoon, was confused and did not understand how this could be possible. Sean was also confused because he did not know that such great power could exist, as his classmate was third on the list in terms of strength. When the centipede's tentacles were destroyed, Sion simply fell to the floor because he could not defend himself. Kim looked closely at his opponent and said that now he would find out what exactly he had been doing outside. He immediately took out a bandage and said that he was the senior supervisor and had always disciplined people like him. Smiling, he said that right now, his opponent was looking at a member of the disciplinary committee. His classmates were very surprised and simply couldn't believe it. They were even more surprised that the newcomer could use possession without even performing a special ritual. The classmates understood that they needed to stop this as soon as possible before it got worse, and at some point decided to wake up the strongest student. However, Shingo stopped them and said that it would be more interesting to see how it all ended. He was very curious to find out how powerful the new kid was, especially since the teachers weren't there yet, and suggested they just watch. The centipede understood that if his opponent could use possession, then he was definitely not ordinary. This meant that the principal had indeed brought him here for a reason, because he could control evil spirits. Kim decided to turn to his spirit, Dokebi, to understand why he looked so strange. He didn't understand why his head looked like a regular lighter instead of a torch, which meant that he was much weaker than before. Dokebi replied that he had to give up one of his parts in order to possess him, which is why his powers had weakened. Kim was a little upset because he had been counting on the powers of his evil spirit, and now he learned that he was much weaker. While they were talking, the centipede decided to attack them because he realized that there was no time to waste. Jihyun laughed and said that he needed to stop distracting himself and take part in their difficult confrontation. He was completely confident in his victory, so he actively attacked his new opponent. Kim Tae-san was confused because his opponent was very strong, but the rotating lamp inside him was silent. Shingo stood and laughed. He was very interested in watching the actions of the new student who was trying very hard. Amused, he said that he would need to fight with all his strength because his opponent was one of the strongest in the class. Jihyun was indeed among the top 10 strongest students of the entire Musenwan Association of Shamans. He laughed and said that he was ready for a real confrontation, especially since they had both already used the power of possession. Looking at Kim, he thought that the new student really stood out in some way, besides being able to enter a state of possession. He also said that he was now ready to punish Sina, who had betrayed him, and decided to join the newcomer who had just arrived. After that, Jahen began to use the technique of strengthening his chitin armor in order to attack his opponent. Kim watched his opponent's actions closely in order to choose the right style and tactics for the confrontation. Jahen curled up into a ball and used a chitin yo-yo that moved uncontrollably and destroyed everything in its path. Kim's head began to ache a little because his opponent was spinning too fast and chaotically. He understood that Dukshin's strength had not yet been fully restored, which meant that he needed to change his tactics. On the other hand, the rotating lantern showed him exactly how this confrontation would end, so he wasn't worried about it. Jahen laughed and said that he would gladly crush him and send him back to the ordinary world. Kim understood that his opponent did not have such a strong aura, so there was simply no chance of victory. Nothing worried him anymore because he understood exactly how this confrontation would end. Only a clown or a general of the world could inflict real damage on him, but not him. Jahen did not inspire any sense of horror or fear, so Kim simply attacked him in the face. Jahen, possessed by the spirit of a centipede, was confused because he did not expect such a simple and direct attack. Shingu, who was the director's nephew, was confused because he had never seen anything like this before. San was also confused because he understood that no one had ever been able to stop the centipede's chitinous ball so easily before. Kim Gonsan, meanwhile, did not react to what was happening and simply continued to sleep because he was not interested at all. Kim Tae-sun was delighted because he understood that he had to become karma for Jahen. Jahen began to remember his childhood, how he stood in the center of the square and prayed. At those moments, he often cried because he understood that he was a special child and did not need to prove anything to anyone. It was during this period that the evil centipede spirit chose him as a vessel for its continued existence. When he was only 7 years old, he underwent a very difficult ritual to accept the spirit. Museon was an organization that maintained the balance of this world, and it was home to shamans of various levels. Jahan gave up his normal life to become part of a large organization of shamans. Therefore, his entire childhood was spent training to become one of the best. At first, there were many children like him, but then they began to weed them out because some showed poor results. Over time, most of them simply could not withstand the trials and left on their own initiative. In the end, only a few remained. There were very few of them, so Jahen's family became much smaller. He always felt sorry for those who left because they had devoted their entire childhood to rigorous training. Over time, all his companions became like family to him, and they stayed together for many years. At one point, one of his companions, An Mi Cheng, announced her decision to leave of her own accord. Jaehoon didn't believe her. He thought she was joking because they had worked so hard to get into this shaman organization. However, she said that she didn't know how it happened, but now she had no choice but to leave the association. She said that yesterday the director had called her in and told her that she was the weakest of the shamans. So she had to leave the organization. Since she wanted to leave at least some trace of herself so that her comrades would not forget her, she took off her earrings and bracelets and hung them on a hook on the desk. At one point, she even started laughing, realizing that from that moment on, she had become an ordinary person and no longer had the right to practice shamanism. She didn't know what to do outside the organization because there was an ordinary world where there were no evil spirits or spiritual beings. Jaehoon did not understand how she could laugh in this situation because she had simply been expelled and had not tried to change anything. Then she turned to him and cried because she realized that she could not do anything and no one could stand up for her either. She admitted that she was very scared. All her life, she had studied only shamanism, and now she'd been asked to simply leave. She didn't want to leave or part with her comrades because she didn't know how to live on and what to do in such a cruel world. It was at these moments that Jaehoon felt a great sense of emptiness because those he considered family were simply disappearing. He understood that they had gone through many trials and long training sessions together, survived various situations, and now everything had simply dissolved. And that is why Jaehoon's heart was filled with so much pain and fear. He did not want to lose any more members of his family. Kim Tae-sun listened to him carefully because he understood his pain. But at the same time, he couldn't change anything. He himself had gone through many trials. However, he was happy because he understood that such principles had long been outdated and that in the modern world, only those who were truly strong survived. Jaehoon did not understand what he meant, and so rage filled his body more and more. Using his body transformation technique, he transformed his arm into a centipede's arm, which possessed great strength. Kim Tae-sung was confused because he did not understand how to act in this situation and what technique to use. The large centipede used a kite and strike to attack his opponent and increase his chances of victory. He said that every time someone new joined the association, one of his family members ended up on the street. Kim Tae-sun actively repelled attacks and blocked damage because he simply did not understand what his opponent meant. Jaehoon shouted that they couldn't just take everything and fix it because he was not like them and had not devoted his entire childhood to training. He just didn't like that newcomers were coming to the Shaman Association and those who were close to him were being thrown out onto the street. Kim Tae-sun also didn't want to give up, so he decided to counterattack his opponent to demonstrate his strength. Jaehoon did not expect such a trick from his opponent and therefore took damage because he simply did not have time to react and block the attack. Kim Tae-sun said that he could not hope that telling a tearful story would change anything. At that moment, our hero began to recall all the actions of the shaman Hwaranhan and realized that he himself had gone through a lot in one day. They understood that they were not going to accept each other's point of view, so at some point, they didn't care what they thought of each other. Kim Tae-sun continued to attack his opponent in order to demonstrate his strength as the victor. Jaehoon was very upset because he realized that he was once again forced to yield to some newcomer who had taken his friend's place. Then he began to remember the student who had also come and taken Anminji's place, behaving extremely inappropriately. He looked very strange, and Jaehoon was angry with him because he was the reason his friend, whom he considered a member of his family, was expelled. Kumgan-san did not understand why people started treating him so strangely on his first day, because he had not done anything yet. When he saw a bracelet hanging on a hook on his desk, he thought it was strange and simply pulled the bracelet off the hook. Then he said that those who leave the Shaman Association should clean up after themselves and not leave any belongings behind. Then he simply broke the bracelet and threw it in the trash can, saying that shamanic items should be with them and not on their desks. Jaehoon had been watching his actions all this time and understood that such a person should not become part of his family under any circumstances. It was Jaehoon who simply could no longer control his anger and dreamed only of how to harm the newcomer. Kim Gan-san was confused because he did not expect to be attacked, so he flew in the opposite direction. Possessed by the spirit of a centipede, he said that the newcomer was not worth the little finger of the person sitting at that desk. Kim Gan-san continued to sit on the floor because he was wondering whether he should show what his obsession looked like. He understood that he would have to show his teeth, otherwise he simply would not be able to survive in this class with such strange traditions. After that, he simply walked up to the centipede, picked him up by the neck, and looked directly into his eyes to understand what he was thinking. Kim Gan-san calmly told him that you always have to be careful with those you challenge because they can be much stronger. Then he easily threw him aside and said that those who don't know how to joke shouldn't come near him, let alone wake him up. The other classmates were confused because they understood that Jahan was the strongest among them, but he lost. So Kyungsan returned to his desk, lay down on it, fell asleep, and said that if anyone woke him up, they would suffer much more. After this incident, Sean came and explained that his brother was a shaman, which is why he ended up in the association and at the shaman school. Jahan was furious again because another stranger had taken the place of one of his family members for unknown reasons. He hated all those who came to their class because they were destroying their family, and he understood that this simply should not be happening. Therefore, he wanted to do anything to make all the newcomers experience the same pain he himself had experienced. Since San was indeed a very weak shaman, he quickly lost the confrontation and became an outcast in the class. Remembering all this, he became very angry, so he gained new strength to confront the newcomer, Kim Tae-soon, completely destroying the school building. He said that stories really had no meaning, and that meaning lay in strength. Using the arthropod technique, he wrapped the entire class in centipede tentacles that left no free space. Ji-hoon was furious and wanted his opponent to prove his strength and his right to be in this class. Using his transformation technique, he wanted to find out as quickly as possible which of them was right. After reading a short spell, he summoned a giant centipede that was much more powerful. Looking his opponent in the eye, he was sure that only the winner would earn the right to take a place in his class. Kim Tae-sun looked at him and understood that centipedes truly loved and protected their family and territory. Kim Tae-sun asked the Dokkaebi spirit to give him all its power to resist the centipede and defeat it. Thus, using the technique of a demonic sprint, Kim managed to quickly avoid the attack and suffer no damage. He said that he did not care about him and his family, because he had come to the class for his own reasons. Ji-hoon was confused. He did not expect his opponent to be so strong. At that moment, Kim Tae-sun jumped up and attacked his opponent, inflicting damage. During the attack, he used fire to destroy his opponent's chitinous armor. Ji-hoon felt very bad. He realized that he could lose this confrontation, just as he had lost to Chikan-san. Kim Tae-sung himself was delighted because he realized that he had a chance to win and prove his superiority in strength. However, to his great surprise, as soon as the centipede's shell was destroyed, there was nothing inside. At the same time, his opponent stood directly behind him and said that arthropods can shed their skin. Kim Tae-sun turned around quickly enough to attack the opponent who had deceived him. He did not understand how this could have happened because the copy of Jaehan was quite realistic and had power in its movements. He could not understand what was happening, and his opponent said that he would take his life in another way. Then he decided with force to place his spirit, a giant centipede, into his opponent's body in order to inflict damage in this way. He was sure that when a spirit enters a body that doesn't suit it, something incredible happens. Kim Tae-sun was thrilled. He was completely sure that he had won, simply because the body of the Heavenly Lord could use any spirit. The classmates watching said that it looked very unpleasant and realized that the newcomer had lost. However, they saw that Kim Tae-soon was not so scared, which meant that something had gone wrong and their classmate was wrong. All the classmates were very surprised and could not believe that such a thing was even possible. Jae-hoon was also confused. He didn't understand how this could be possible because it wasn't part of his plan. Everyone watched in amazement and saw that Kim Tae-soon had easily subjugated the evil spirit to his will. Kim Tae-sun admitted that he felt great, although at first he really felt bad. But he even liked this shell. His spirit, Dukshin, explained that a shaman could only merge with one spirit, but the body of the Heavenly Lord could absorb any number of spirits. Thus, it was the body of the Heavenly Lord that allowed him to absorb absolutely any number of evil spirits, including the centipede. Kim was delighted because he even began to rejoice at the appearance of a new evil spirit that was completely under his control. However, at that very moment, Jae-hun began to feel very ill and did not understand what was happening. He fell to the floor, foam coming out of his mouth, which meant that something had indeed gone wrong and his powers were rapidly leaving his body. His spiritual illness had returned, despite the fact that he had already been initiated, which meant that his spirit had to be returned to him urgently. Dukshin Dokkaebi explained that if a shaman absorbs a spirit that was already attached to a person, the person becomes very ill and may leave this world. Kim Tae-sun did not understand how exactly he was supposed to return the evil spirit, and his demonic being asked him to simply touch the enemy's body. Kim understood this immediately, ran up to Jae-hoon, and touched his chest in order to return his evil spirit and restore his strength. He did not understand what had happened and who Kim Tae-soon really was, who could take control of his spirit. His classmates asked the boys to calm down and end the fight, but our hero had no intention of stopping because he wanted to finish what he had started. Jaehoon was confused because he had already expended too much energy and could not fight anyone else. However, to everyone's surprise, Sen stepped between them and asked the newcomer to stop and cease attacking his opponent. He said that they needed to calm down and end it because it was wrong, and they should at least talk first. Kim Tae-sun was confused. He didn't understand how someone could defend the person who had been bullying and kicking him for no reason all this time. Sean said that he remembered everything perfectly well, but added that this confrontation simply no longer made sense. He explained that they continued to fight. Kim Tae-sun himself would also become someone's enemy, and the cycle of hatred would continue. Sean also said that he now understood and shared Jaehan's feelings because he too did not want to lose his family members. He also said that there was no need to waste energy defending him and promised to cope on his own in the future. Kim Tae-sun said that he understood everything perfectly, but did not understand why Seun stayed at the School of Shamans and continued to endure his tormentors. Seun began to recall the teachings of those who were dear to him and explained that he simply could not leave yet because he had to fulfill his brother's task. He also remembered that he had to take the life of one person, and only then would he be able to become better and stronger as he had promised his family. All of his classmates were surprised because they realized that Son was actually normal. He was just trying to become stronger in order to fulfill his promise. After that, he smiled and said that he had to bear this burden himself so as not to let down those whose place he had taken in the Shaman Association. Kim Tae-sun looked at him intently, then hugged him and said that he understood everything and was ready to go all the way. He told Jaehoon that he liked this guy because even though he suffered from bullying, he still protected those who were dear to him. Jaehoon just kept quiet because he realized that his opponent was much stronger than him and he simply couldn't win. He said he was ready to give up and promised not to bother Sen anymore or bully him just for fun. However, realizing that his reputation had been severely damaged, he also added that he was not going to apologize under any circumstances. Kim Tae-sun put his hand on his roommate and explained that he would always be there for him until he became stronger. Seon thanked him because it was thanks to him that they were able to talk and understand that each of them had their own goals. To the surprise of everyone present, Kim held out his hand and said that now he had to pay him a friendly fee. All of his classmates, including Son, were confused. They did not understand what Kim Tae-sun meant because what was happening was strange. Sean began to laugh and look at him in confusion because he did not know what a friendly fee was and why he had to pay it at all. Kim Tae-sun said that since they had become friends, he had to pay him a friendly fee for protecting him from his enemies. Kim Tae-sun started shouting that only business makes people friends and family in this world, and that no one will ever do anything for free. Jaehoon was confused. He didn't expect Kim Tae-sun, with his righteous words, to start demanding money from his own classmate. Looking at their dialogue, he realized that it was now unclear who was good and who was bad, because it all seemed strange. While Jaehoon was thinking that the new guy was actually a fun guy, he missed the attack on his face. Kim Tae-sun was surprised. He didn't immediately understand what had happened because he was busy talking to his roommate. Turning around, they and Seun were confused and didn't understand why Kim Gun-san had decided to wake up and what exactly had woken him up. Meanwhile, Jaehoon was pressed against the wall and felt very bad being unconscious. Kim Gung-san entered the classroom and stood there, looking intently at the new guy because he had an interesting aura about him. Smiling, he said that the newcomer exuded something very interesting and that he wanted to take part in the confrontation. A few minutes ago, the assistant director had prepared the documents for approval and acceptance of the newcomer into the class. Shinga said that they were about to have a meeting and hoped that everyone had confirmed their participation. The assistant showed him the list and said that everyone had confirmed their participation except Shinju, who was busy with other matters. The principal understood that after such a scandal, those who should have taken responsibility simply decided not to come to the meeting. Therefore, they decided to leave the meeting date unchanged and prepared for it in order to resolve current issues. Another assistant director entered the office and realized that he had come at a bad time because the director was busy talking. Shinga said that everything was fine and asked how the newcomer to the class felt about what was happening there. The assistant reported that when someone from outside came to the class, all the students began to resist him. So the traditions had not changed. Shinga laughed and said that nothing could go wrong because the children were able to figure things out for themselves without interference. However, they suddenly heard a very strange noise that seemed strange to them, so they went to the window. Looking out the window at the school building, they realized that Jaehoon had begun to enter a state of possession, which meant that something bad was about to happen. They understood that they couldn't just stand by and watch, because they were facing a real emergency. Namga decided to go and investigate, but the principal stopped him because they had more serious matters that needed to be dealt with. He said that someone else should take care of it, especially since the training mentor was about to return with a report. Shinga checked his schedule and reported that one of the students who had been sent on an assignment was due to return to school today. He wanted the students to learn to solve all their problems themselves, so he assigned this task to Lee Sung, who was on the expedition. Lee Sung asked his assistant Barry not to relax because they were returning to Muzinwan with a very important report. After receiving a message from the director, they did not understand why there were so many possessed people causing chaos out of nowhere. Lee Sun picked up the phone because he realized that ignoring a call from the director was simply unacceptable, and he couldn't afford to do so. Shinga apologized to him and said that he understood that they were tired from the trip, but there was one issue that needed to be resolved urgently. He explained that a new student had arrived at the school, but he had started a serious conflict with the other students, and it needed to be resolved. Lee Sun realized that he had no choice but to accept the call, so he decided to submit his report later. He then informed Barry that a confrontation had begun in Musavan and that they needed to hurry back to the Shaman Association. He understood that they had no other choice because there was no one else to deal with it now. Analyzing the information received from the director, they realized that they would have to deal with the tiger that was Kim Gong-san. The other classmates immediately rushed to Jaehan, begging him to wake up and come to his senses. Kim Tae-sun was confused because Jaehan should have been taken to the medical office quickly, and the tiger-possessed boy was heading straight for him. Soon explained to him that the worst thing had happened because Kim Gon-san had woken up, and it could be very dangerous. Kim Tae-sun did not understand why Son looked so frightened and was even trembling with fear, and who exactly the student with the tiger was. Kim Gon-san was the second most powerful student in the entire school, and he couldn't stand it when someone came along who was his equal in strength. Seon understood that he needed to call someone urgently, otherwise the whole school would simply be destroyed. But Jaehan stopped him. Entering a state of possession, Kim Tae-sun said that he never refuses challenges thrown at him. He smiled and looked straight into his opponent's face, saying that he could start his attack first as a concession. Kim Gong-san entered a state of possession by evil tiger spirits and said that they must fight each other with full force. Kim Tae-sun was confused. He did not understand what his opponent meant, since they used witchcraft or shamanism. However, he did not finish his sentence before he felt his opponent grab him by the neck. Kim Tae-sun was confused. He did not think that Kim Gong-san would be such a strong and powerful opponent. Kim Gang-san said that he simply did not value his life, so he asked him to awaken all his powers. Kim Tae-sun tried to understand what exactly was in front of him, because such power could not be found in an ordinary person. At the same time, he noticed that the swivel lamp had not yet reacted, but the opponent had already managed to attack. After thinking for a moment, Kim Tae-sun began to push his opponent's hand away, realizing that he was still too weak. Using his personal secret technique, he decided to attack his opponent immediately and directly in the forehead area with his own forehead. Kim Tae-sun laughed and said that his body was so hardened that even his forehead was like iron. But for some reason, at that very moment, everything started to blur before his eyes because his head began to spin and he fell. He didn't understand why the whole world around him was spinning and why his head was spinning at such a crucial moment. Kim Tae-sun realized that he simply could not block his opponent's attacks because he was fast and strong and proved to be more powerful. Kim Gon-sa himself was confused that his opponent simply did not understand what he was talking about. Then he touched his hand, where 3 disasters were sealed, and said he wanted to see what it looked like. Tearing part of the sleeve, he told him to immediately release this evil spirit, which was the destroyer of all living thing. The other students were also confused, because when they saw the image of the eye on the newcomer's hand, they realized that they had seen it somewhere before. Kim Tae-sun said that it was from the enemy's hand, and that it gave off a very pleasant and ominous smell. So he wanted to see it. He was delighted, because he understood that this was the only way he could truly demonstrate all his powers. However, Kim Tae-sun simply pushed him with his foot, saying that this spirit could not be released in such a situation on school grounds. Getting to his feet, Kim Tae-sun said that it was a difficult spirit, so it could not be released. Otherwise, everyone would lose their lives immediately. On the other hand, he understood that the student possessed by the tiger needed to be disciplined because he was acting too provocatively. Kim Tae-sun was very upset because he did not want to fight. He was simply interested in seeing the powerful spirit. Then he decided to deliberately attack his opponent so that he would have no choice but to release the spirit. Kim Tae-sun understood that he himself was already at his limit and was ready to release at least one disaster, but he could not afford to do so. Looking at his opponent and assessing his actions, he realized that he had approached this confrontation too lightly. He understood that if everything continued in the same vein, he would simply take a lot of damage and end up in the afterlife. On the other hand, Kim Tae-sun understood that this was a better option than releasing 3 calamities, especially since part of it was sealed in the director's body. He realized that he needed to come up with another strategic plan urgently, so he began to think about his actions and tactics. The first item on his list was to get under the director's wing and try to start the newest life Musinwan could imagine. With the help of his power, he wanted to make new clients and friends who would simply pay him a friendly fee and tell him information about his mother. After he proved his power and officially fulfilled his duties as a member of the punitive squad, he wanted to build a new kingdom. The plan was really very good, but everything changed when Kim Gang-san attacked him because he revealed his identity. Kim Tae-sun covered his face with his hands and realized that he had no choice but to endure all this humiliation and pain. His opponent was very strong and powerful, and his movements were like those of a tiger because they were fast and precise. At some point, Kim Tae-sun realized that he had no choice but to endure and wait for someone to save him. Kim Gang-san was surprised. He did not understand why his opponent did not start blocking his attacks, or even try to attack himself. When Kim Tae-sun decided to slightly restore the strength of his demonic spirit with the help of fiery techniques, Kim Tae-sun used a hidden technique of Fiery Atlas to fill the entire room with fire with the help of Dokubi's powers. He was sure that he had managed to defeat such an opponent because Dukshin was one of the strongest evil spirits. He was confident that he had managed to defeat such an opponent because Dukshin was one of the strongest evil spirits. However, Kim Gang-san stood there without even a scratch on him, without even the slightest damage. After that, he began to attack his opponent himself, saying that he had to release the evil spirit that was hiding in his hand. Our hero did not understand how resilient his opponent was, since even the strongest attack of a spiritual being did not help him. The other students watched what was happening with curiosity, and only San said that they needed to call someone for help. His classmates were surprised that he suggested they intervene, because they were much weaker, even though there were many of them. However, Shinjin said that they would not intervene because such a spectacle was not something you saw every day. They did not want to miss such a performance, and they did not owe the newcomer anything, so they did not want to intervene. In fact, his classmates were simply afraid because they understood that even if they all attacked together, Kim Gang-san would still win. Possessed by the spirit of a tiger, he was able to become second in the entire hierarchy in just 3 months, even though he had not undergone the spirit acceptance ceremony. This meant that he had managed to rise to second place solely thanks to his physical strength. Therefore, his classmates told San that they would just have to sit quietly and watch what was happening, simply placing bets. On the other hand, his classmates noticed that the newcomer was also strange because he did not attack, but deliberately defended himself. Shinjin was even curious about what the newcomer might be plotting and what he was hiding in his hand with such a strange pattern. While his classmates were discussing this, the participants in the confrontation missed each other's attacks and scattered in different directions. It was very difficult and painful for our hero, but he understood that he could not let go of his greeting, otherwise everything would be different. He understood that everything was not going according to plan, and he was not in a position to fight back against his opponent. He understood that he would have to act much more decisively than it might seem at first glance. Kim Gang-san said that he did not understand why he was so actively defending his spirit and did not want to demonstrate it. He shouted so loudly that all his classmates even covered their ears from such a loud cry. Kim Tae-sun covered his ears and asked his opponent to calm down because he did not plan to activate his eye. Kim Gang-san said that the principal had deceived him because he promised that the shaman school would be fun and exciting, but it was too boring. Kim Tae-sun laughed and said that his passive tactics were very interesting and that he wanted to show him his true power. All the other classmates were thrilled. They were sure that now the newcomer would demonstrate his true power. The tiger-possessed boy was thrilled. He really liked what he was about to see because he had been sitting in school for a month and just sleeping. He hoped that now the newcomer would demonstrate his true power so that they could truly oppose each other. The fiery spirit himself was confused because Kim Tae-sun had decided to release him for some reason, despite having hidden him for so long. Sean didn't understand what was happening because the man who had been defending himself suddenly removed the possession from himself for some reason. Kim Tae-sun's face immediately changed. He did not understand what his opponent was doing and why he had removed his obsession. At the same time, Kim Tae-sun was crying with laughter, realizing that he had easily deceived his opponent and was therefore laughing at him. Kim Gon-sun realized that they were simply trying to humiliate and deceive him in public, so he entered a state of rage in order to attack. Our hero was already prepared for this, so he simply gritted his teeth and endured all the blows and damage. However, this time the attack was so strong that it simply blew him away to the other end of not just the classroom, but the school. Sun understood that Kim Tae-sun was in a lot of pain at that moment, but there was nothing he could do about it. The demonic creature stood near its master and asked him to wake up and regain consciousness as quickly as possible. Dukshin couldn't understand why his master had suddenly decided to take the possession upon himself and thereby weaken his own defenses. It was at this moment that the lantern appeared. Kim wanted exactly that. He wanted to talk to him and learn more about his childhood and his mother. The lantern smiled because he understood that his master had deliberately brought himself to this state just to see him. Kim Tae-sun laughed and said that his bet had actually won because he really wanted to see the turning lantern. He told him that he remembered that it was during his last confrontation with the colonel that it appeared for the first time in his life. He understood that the lantern possessed a vast amount of information, so he asked for its assistance and explained how to defeat the tiger. The lantern smiled and said that this was indeed one of his abilities, and that he knew exactly how to confront any opponent. Usually, he simply replayed memories from the past in front of his master, so that they would give him as much strength as possible. When he asked him to recall the feeling that gave him the most strength, so that he could feel like a real demon, it was this power that could help him win. Everyone else was confused, because the newcomer's body began to be covered in fire. His classmates also did not understand what was happening, because the light and heat prevented them from seeing the whole picture. In an instant, the newcomer's entire arm was covered in controllable fire. And this was the discovery of the Junior Flame technique. After that, Kim Tae-sun stood up and, to the surprise of everyone else, said that he was ready to continue the confrontation. Activating the power of the tiger, the opponent was delighted, realizing that his opponent had not deceived him and had shown that he was amazing. Then they decided to continue the confrontation, realizing that both were practically equal. Kim Tae-sun understood that at the moment his power was much less than it was the very first time during his awakening. But in principle, it was enough for him. As soon as the opponents came face to face, a flying Barry appeared between them, looking very cute and friendly. She decided to simply push their foreheads together and, throwing them to the floor, told them that they should live in peace and harmony. His classmates stood with bated breath, watching what was happening, realizing that the strongest student, Lee Sun, had most likely returned. Sun was also very surprised because he did not expect to see Barry at that moment and was very happy that help had finally arrived. Lee Sun looked very unhappy. He did not understand what his classmates had done in his absence. Activating his powers, he said that if everyone did not calm down immediately, they would have to do so involuntarily. At first, Kim Tae-sun looked frightened because he could not immediately understand what had happened and who had come. He began to look around to understand how they had been stopped and why he was on the floor. Then Son began to shout that everything would be fine now because their classmate had returned from the expedition. After that, he pointed to Lee Sun and Barry, saying that he was the strongest student in the Shaman Association class. However, our hero still couldn't understand who Lee Sun was and why all the students changed their behavior so drastically when he appeared in the classroom. Kim Tae-sun didn't immediately understand whether the person in front of him was a girl or a boy, but Sen said that it was a boy, and that he was their roommate. Princess Barry looked around and said that there was complete chaos, which had not been the case when they were in class. At that moment, Lee's son turned to the class president, Dae Yura, because he did not understand how she could have allowed all this to happen. She tried to justify herself, saying that she was not to blame and that she remembered that obsession was prohibited on school grounds. She said that she herself had tried to separate them, but she simply did not have the strength to do so because she was a girl. After that, she said that the newcomer was entirely to blame for the disorder that had occurred, so she asked not to be questioned. Kim Tae-sun was confused because he realized that when he confronted the centipede, she did not intervene either. Lee Sung introduced himself and said he was glad to meet him because he had heard a lot about him from the principal. However, he said that as a new student, he could have caused such a disturbance at school on his first day in class. Kim Tae-sun tried to ask him to step aside, saying that they weren't done yet, but Lee Sun simply attacked him without warning. Our hero didn't understand what it was and why he was attacked for no reason by a stranger. Lee Sun explained that obsession was forbidden on school grounds because they came to study, not to fight each other. He said that such provocative behavior was unacceptable for a student in the shaman's class and asked him to stop. He looked closely at Kim and said that taking the lives of his classmates, no matter who they were, was simply unacceptable. Kim Tae-sun started yelling and saying that he was exaggerating and that they were just sorting things out. However, Lee Sun told him that if he hadn't intervened, everyone would have suffered very serious injuries that were incompatible with life. Kim Tae-sun was confused because he realized that the person he had just attacked was already preparing to attack him again. He wanted to resist his opponent as actively and quickly as possible. But to his surprise, he was stopped by the tiger-possessed man. Kim simply flew to the side and did not understand what was happening in this class and why everyone was so angry. Kim Gon-sun smiled and greeted Lee-sun, saying that he had missed him very much because he wanted to test his strength again. Lee-sun said that he had already warned him to behave calmly and quietly, and above all, not to demonstrate his strength on school grounds. Kim Gang-san began to get possessed, asking his classmate to take back his words because he had no intention of losing. At that moment, Sunmu ran up to Kim because he wanted to assess his current condition and bring him back to his senses. Kim Gang-san looked into Lee-sun's eyes and said that now he was his debtor because he had opposed and prevented their confrontation. Lee-sun said that he wasn't interested in any of this because he had completely different tasks and plans for his time at the shaman school. He also added that, based on rumors, Kier's punishment could be lifted early, so it was necessary to keep quiet. Kim Gon-sun grabbed Lisbon and tried to convey to him that he knew nothing about it. Kim came to his senses and did not understand why they attacked him just like that, without warning, so he wanted to tell them again. Kim Gon-sun asked him to relax, saying that he was no longer interested in him. However, our hero had no intention of calming down because he wanted to take revenge on them for humiliating him. He began to move very quickly in their direction in order to attack them and entered a state of obsession. However, just before reaching them, he simply fell to the floor and fell asleep because his strength had left him and he had none left. He realized that he had no strength left at all, which meant he needed a long and restorative rest. He felt a little awkward, but he understood that this was the limit of his abilities. He wanted to sleep very badly and couldn't even get up, after which he let go of his spirit, Dukshen. Barry sat and drew, but unexpectedly, the man whose face she had drawn on decided to wake up after all. Kim Tae-sun was confused. He didn't understand where he was, and Barry, who was standing in front of him, said that he looked great. Then she handed him a mirror and said that his face had been officially transformed. Kim Tae-sun was furious. He didn't understand who she was or why she had painted his face. However, Barry simply attacked him, saying that he had no right to speak that way to such a great lady as herself. Barry was a goddess of the underworld and a princess, so she was very attractive, but a married woman. He said that she had no right to behave like that with sick people and asked him to leave. Lee-sun smiled and said that while he was asleep, Sen had told him everything, so he wanted to talk to him personally. Kim Tae-sun said that he was on the school disciplinary committee, so he couldn't stand such students and just wanted to stand up for Sen. However, Sen began to smile awkwardly and laugh, realizing that he had presented everything a little differently to the most important and powerful student. Lee-sun smiled and said that only in the old school was it acceptable to take money from friends, but they didn't have that. Lee-sun said that it wasn't secret information anyway, so he asked not to scold Sean for telling everything. Kim Tae-sun was confused because Lee-sun said that he understood that he had the body of a heavenly lord and was well informed. Then he realized that the principal had probably told him about it, which was why he knew so much. Lee-sun asked him to calm down and said that the principal had told only him about this and no one else. That was why he considered Taesong to be a choja. That is, a person who had taken over someone else's body with his spirit. That was why they wanted to talk alone, to discuss everything, and correctly plan their tactics for behavior at school. Kim Tae-sun was confused. He didn't understand what to expect from this person and how to behave. Lee-sun thought for a moment and said he was ready to talk, then handed Kim some wet wipes and asked him to wipe his face. Kim Tae-sun was very uncomfortable and immediately began to wipe his face, but Barry tried to stop it. After thinking for a moment, she said that the marker was indelible, so he wouldn't be able to just wipe it off. Kim Tae-sun was confused because he didn't expect her to draw on his face with an indelible marker. Sion couldn't hold back his laughter, so he just started laughing loudly without thinking about the feelings of others. Then he told Lee-sun everything about how he had been living a normal life, but after the prophecy, he was attacked by shamans, and on his birthday, everything changed. After finishing his story, Kim Tae-sun thought for a moment about whether it was okay to tell Lee-sun all this. On the other hand, the principal himself had sent Lee-sun, which meant he could be trusted. So he exhaled and continued talking. Lee-sun said that all this was necessary only to assess the situation correctly, so he asked him not to worry. The most important thing for them now was to keep their mouths shut and not tell their classmates about it. Our hero put his hand on his new friend and said that he would keep a close eye on him to make sure he didn't spill his secret. Lee-sun understood that he was hearing about all this for the first time. The prophecies and the brother of the heavenly lord. in whom a foreign soul lived. However, he did not understand why the director had not told him about this in their conversation, and more importantly, why he had brought such a person into the association of shamans. Our hero did not understand why his new friend was looking at him like that, but the latter simply remained silent. On the other hand, Lee understood that he was very disturbed by the tattoo on his new roommate's arm. Barry also looked closely at this tattoo because she understood that it could conceal enormous power. After carefully examining his arm, Lee-sun understood and decided to ask the princess of the underworld if she understood. Then they realized that they were looking at the offspring of an Odakshin, a mythological creature from Korean folklore representing the spirit of darkness. Seon was very frightened when he heard this name because he did not understand whether his neighbor was really the offspring of Odukshin. He said that he had heard a lot about this spirit from legends and various tales told in his homeland. Such a spirit was called the firstborn spirit because it was the original terror and possessed enormous destructive power. Son said he was sure that these were just myths and that the mother of spirits did not actually exist. Barry realized that when they saw a certain spirit just before leaving the expedition, it was him. Lee's son said that he had also always believed that everything related to Odukshin was just a legend, but he saw it with his own eyes. This creature had exactly the same aura as the aura of the 3 disasters sealed in the hand of the new disciple with the body of the heavenly Lord. This creature was very powerful, but the strangest thing was that it also had a disciplinary committee bandage on its hand. Lee's son realized that, thank God, they were lucky and the creature did not attack them, but simply noticed that it was being watched and decided to disappear without leaving any traces. Sean admitted that it was the first time he had seen someone's face so tense and wondered who could have scared him so much. Lee-sun was very surprised because our hero started joking about his seal, even though at that moment, a serious conversation was taking place. He understood that no one could even guess when exactly the disasters would come out. The strangest thing about the whole situation was the behavior of director Shin Ga, who did not say anything about it. However, he understood his current mission. He needed to ensure the complete safety of the students around him from the newcomer. Our hero understood that Lee-sun was indeed a powerful opponent, so he did not want to argue with him. Lee-sun said that he should not behave thoughtlessly and impulsively because he was dangerous to Musin-wan. He also had to start learning how to use his power correctly, according to the rules of this place, and only according to them. He also said that if he followed all the instructions and cooperated well, there would be no more problems. Kim Tae-sun did not listen to him and said that he wanted to order some chicken, so he asked what would be for dinner. Lee-sun was furious because he had just said that according to the rules of the school dormitory, food could not be ordered at night. Kim Tae-sun said that it was just a rule because sometimes they could be broken, so he clarified whether they would be bone-in fillets or plain. Lee-sun started to yell and said that this kind of behavior was the problem in the dormitory and school. He said that such careless antics could put everyone in great danger, so it was necessary to be more careful. Kim Tae-sun said that he just wanted to order some food because he hadn't had time to eat, and asked how old he was. Lee-sun said he was 17 and that his age had nothing to do with their current conversation. Kim Tae-sun immediately began to shout with delight and pat him on the head, saying that you can't yell at your elder. Lee-sun immediately pushed him away and said that such behavior was unacceptable. Not in the room, not at school, not anywhere. Kim Tae-sun was very upset and did not understand why his new roommate was behaving so aggressively. Lee-sun said that they were the same and that there were different people studying in the course, and that didn't mean they were brothers or sisters. Then Kim Tae-sun replied that since he wasn't listening to him, he wasn't going to listen to him either because he wasn't interested in any of it. Lee-sun thought that he was indeed wrong and that he needed to soften his behavior and attitude toward the newcomer. Then Kim Tae-sun turned around and went to his room, saying that he was very sad that he was first attacked and then not even given anything to eat. Barry was very upset because she herself was very hungry after such a long expedition. After thinking for a moment, Lee-sun apologized for his behavior and also informed him that deliveries were not coming at that time. Kim Tae-sun immediately stopped and thanked his new roommate, then said he was going to the kitchen to get some food. Lee-sun pointed out that this was only because they hadn't eaten today, but according to the rules, they weren't allowed to eat at night. Otherwise, the whole room would be punished. Kim Tae-sun said that he realized it would be very difficult to eat at this school, so he decided to cook noodles and asked if they would eat with him. He replied that he just couldn't control his emotions because, in fact, he needed to be more. Then he turned around and headed for his room because he understood that violating the rules of conduct in the dormitory was unacceptable. Kim Tae-sun said that he had already cooked noodles for everyone and that they should just eat together. then everything would be fine. Barry also started shouting that she would love to eat right now because she was very hungry. However, Lee Sun stopped her and said that although it was completely forbidden today, it was only an exception, and in the future, they should refrain from doing so. Going to his room, Lee Sun was very surprised that the very person who had broken the rules was a member of the plenary committee. Kim Tae-sun didn't understand why Lee Sun was so sad and serious, but decided not to pay attention to him. Kim Tae-sun thought for a moment and said that he had never had friends like that. In fact, he didn't have any friends at all. Lee Sun thought about his answer because he understood that when they were on expeditions, there was also a member of the disciplinary committee. He found this coincidence very strange and did not understand whether he had seen a true evil creature or not. After thinking for a moment, he announced that he was going to his room to rest, wished the others bon appetit, and reminded them that this was a one-time exception. Barry looked very upset because she really wanted to try the freshly cooked noodles. Lee Sun decided to clarify why she had painted the newcomer's face, probably to lighten the mood. Barry pointed out that when the conversation is serious, it goes much better in a light atmosphere. So she decided to do so. Lee Sun asked her to refrain from such jokes and actions in the future because when they were on the road, the situation was serious. Meanwhile, he was in the hospital and his classmates were peeling an apple for him. Other classmates sat in line and did not understand why they had been assigned a newcomer whom they did not want to see anymore. A classmate looked up information about the newcomer's tattoo on the internet and realized that it was a special mark. Meanwhile, Kim Gong-san sat on the floor and slept as usual because he was bored again without any confrontations. Sun and Kim ate freshly cooked noodles and thought about how delicious and nutritious they were, and how they hadn't been able to eat them before. Meanwhile, the director arrived at the meeting and greeted everyone, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a whole month. He was grateful to everyone for coming to the meeting, despite their busy schedules. His assistant said that he was grateful to everyone present for coming and wanted to introduce each of them. Among them was the Chief of Staff, Musin Wona, who reported directly to the ministry, Ms. Han Jarrell. There was also Mr. Namgun, who was the head of the training department of the Shaman Association and monitored the progress and development of the shamans. Mr. Gian, the head of the research and development department, attended the meeting along with his chief, Miss Seem. Mr. Kim Gap-jin had passed away, so he was replaced by Elder Lee In-guk, who attended the meeting. A large number of guests were able to attend the meeting, understanding the importance and significance of the issues at hand. Mr. Cheliensen, the Minister of Culture, was also invited to attend today. The Minister of Culture said that she had heard about the strange things that were happening with the shamans, but did not understand what century they were living in. The minister was very pleased with everything that was happening because they were performing strange rituals in a normal city. The minister said that the Ministry of Culture could not support this, especially since they did not attend his inauguration. The director looked at him intently, but paid no attention because he understood that ordinary people did not understand anything about spirits. The minister continued to shout that this organization should have been closed down long ago and that its funding should be stopped. Then the director simply gave him his glasses, which allowed him to see spirits, and asked him to begin the presentation. When the door began to open, there was a large pig tied to a table. The pig had a human-like appearance and said that it was very hungry and wanted to eat as soon as possible. Not understanding what was happening, the assistant director Nam Ga explained to him that he was looking at a living person with a monster. When the minister realized that there was indeed a spirit near the man that was very hungry and lived and existed at the expense of the man's strength, Shinga said that although it was hard to believe, spirits really did exist, and there had been so many strange incidents over the last month. Cheklinson was very frightened and did not understand why they had invited a real evil spirit to the presentation, as it could be dangerous. Then Shingu called the minister's bodyguards and easily took his weapon to demonstrate the project. After that, he said that he would use it only a few times and then definitely return it. The bodyguard was very frightened and did not understand what would happen next, and the director decided to attack the pig spirit. The minister was confused. He did not understand why it was necessary to attack a person, even though he had an evil spirit inside him. However, the pig spirit only survived the bullets and said that it was not very tasty because he wanted to get new human souls. Then the minister was really scared. He realized that it was impossible to kill the spirit with weapons. The spirit was very evil, so he said that he was too hungry and could no longer tolerate such treatment. At that moment, he broke free and began to run towards the Minister of Culture and Education, as well as towards the most important guest. However, at that moment, another spirit began to attack him to protect the minister from possible harm. The man who was possessed by the spirit of a pig simply lost in this confrontation and fell to the ground. The minister looked very frightened. He did not understand what this was and how to deal with it properly. After that, the evil spirit of the pig began to separate from the man's body. The director smiled and said that before doubting their work, one must first check everything and make sure it is real. The minister cried with happiness that he was alive and said that now he really understood how important this department was. The director thanked him for his help and said that now they could start the meeting and discuss current issues. The assistant director said that they could not continue the meeting until they had discussed the main points. Therefore, at the very beginning of the meeting, they had to review the events of the past month. He played a video presentation and said that at the beginning, the shaman posted a video online, after which spirits began to appear. These spirits began to possess ordinary people, creating many possessed individuals, one of whom they had just seen. The best shamans were sent to fight these spirits, but there were simply not enough of them because their numbers were too small. Shinga reported that the situation was only getting worse. And as it turned out, bad news never came alone. He said that before, they could deal with the spirits one by one because they acted independently and often got into trouble themselves. There were also sometimes difficult cases, but they were able to deal with them successfully. However, now the situation had changed. This was because the possessed began to gather in groups and obey the orders of only one person. Thus, the evil spirits from the strongest black talismans of Hwanarhan began to work together. With them was also the demon of Mount Pek Tucson, a sacred mountain on the border between China and Korea, which was a symbol of strength and purity. In this regard, the attacks of the possessed became much more serious, and therefore it became impossible to track their movements. The minister was very frightened and did not understand what they should do now, and whether it was worth involving ordinary ministry employees. The director explained that this would be impossible because he had just demonstrated that weapons had no effect on spirits. Shinga asked everyone not to worry and said that he could involve all the students who were in the Shaman Association today in this matter. He also suggested dividing the students into groups so that they could confront the possessed and search for traces of the shaman Juan Hedon. Since the shamans were really strong and they went on trial missions, the results were just amazing. The minister started smiling and asked if everything could be solved this way and how much the budget would have to be increased. Shinga said that everything could be solved, but at that moment, a bottle of water flew into his face. One of the representatives present said that they were out of their minds because students should not be sent on such difficult tasks. Others present understood that when the director and this girl met in the same place, they always argued with each other. The girl said that under no circumstances should children be sent into combat, as this is prohibited by international law. The director said that his boss, Ms. Sim, was overreacting, that he hadn't said anything like that, and that he only wanted to increase their power. He just wanted them to be able to demonstrate their strength, since they had been training at the Shamanic Association for a long time. Ms. Sim disagreed with him and believed that he had decided to use the students' power only to increase their numbers. Then the director said that they could hold a vote to find out what the other members of the meeting thought about it. However, the director said that he understood her concern for the students, but that she was being too naive and letting her emotions get the better of her. Miss Sim shouted and said that she disagreed and would not argue with him because his reasoning was worthless. Then Shinga interrupted her and said that there was worse news because the mother of all spirits had awakened and the students had noticed traces of Oduk Shin. Everyone else present was confused because they didn't know she existed at all and thought it was just part of a legend. The director reported that according to the report, a new creature had appeared with energy very similar to the three disasters. This meant only that it could wake up and start acting at any moment, and then they would have other problems. The director of the Shaman Association said he agreed to hold a fair vote to determine whether to let the students go. He explained that since they didn't have much time, it would be a simple vote, and the majority would decide. So he asked everyone to think carefully. The other participants in the meeting understood that they really needed to hurry because it was unknown when they would meet again. The director asked Ms. Sim if she agreed to hold a vote and decide fairly so that there would be no disputes later. She said she agreed on the condition that the vote would be open and that everyone except him would participate. The director said he fully agreed, so he announced that the vote would be open. The representative of the Ministry of Defense agreed with the proposal because we already had so much work to do. Ms. Sim said that she would be against it in any case because she felt sorry for the students. The representative of the research committee also agreed with this idea because he needed as many samples of possessed people as possible. Namga said he was against it because he didn't like the idea of students, who are children, taking part in something like this. The director was confused because he didn't understand how his assistant had decided to go against him and not support his decision. He explained that the students' morale was unstable, so he decided not to rush into making such decisions. On the other hand, he understood that in his case, he needed to watch the principal's facial expression as he exerted a strange force. The principal understood that the score was already 2-2, but one member of the meeting was missing. But his assistant said he had a message. The assistant reported that the absent member, Shinga, would still be against it even if he did not propose it, and asked that his vote be taken into account. The director was horrified because he did not expect that even the most unrestrained committee would also reject him instead of supporting him. He did not understand by what right someone who did not even attend the meeting had the right to participate in the vote at all. The representative of cultural development raised his hand and said that he agreed with this idea because the students had long been children. Mrs. Sim was surprised. She did not understand how the elder could agree to such an idea. She understood that when the elder's grandson, Allison, was sent on an expedition, he was very angry and worried. After that, he approached the minister and said that his vote would be decisive, so he was waiting for his answer and asked him to think very carefully about everything. The minister was confused. He did not understand how such an important decision could be placed on him, especially since he had only learned about the spirits today. Mrs. Sim began to shout and say that the minister should think about the students and public opinion. The director explained that if his political career ended, there would be no other chance. So the minister had to agree. Then Mrs. Sim said that the public would simply not forgive him and would not accept him as minister if the children suffered. The director decided to take a different approach and showed the minister a photo of his own son, saying that he too could suffer. Yoon-suk was the minister's son, and a month ago, he had been involved in an incident where a group of students lost consciousness at school. The minister was confused. He did not understand how the director and the Shaman Association could possibly know about this situation and the existence of his son. Miss Sim realized that she had simply lost because the director reported that his son had lost consciousness due to the spirit's interference. Shinga said that there were many innocent children outside who needed protection, so he had to take care of it. Using his manipulative powers, the principal reached out to the minister and told him to agree. The minister thought for a moment and realized that he really had nothing to lose. So he said he agreed to the idea. Thanks to the fact that the vote was over, it was decided that Musin 1's students would participate in the tasks. She understood that the director himself had proposed the vote, even though the conditions were not initially in his favor. However, when the results were announced, the director looked completely different, and this aroused great suspicion on the part of the others. She had the distinct feeling that the director had been able to predict the outcome of the meeting. She understood that she had to talk to him regardless of the outcome, as this decision could have consequences. In addition, Miss Sim understood that the director's past was already too strange, so she knocked and entered his office. However, upon entering the office, she realized that neither the director nor his assistant were there, which was very strange. Approaching the door, she saw the director standing there, saying that he thought the vote would fail, but it might still be possible to save it. Shinga did not know how to thank the elder now, or why he had decided to change his mind and agree to their decision. The elder said that he had come here for a completely different matter. He did not understand why she had not told the most important thing without mentioning the Heavenly Lord. Mrs. Sim was confused because she had overheard their conversation and realized that they were talking about something that had happened 8 years ago. The director said that it was too early to talk about it, so they had to resolve the current situation first. However, the elder was furious. He said that he did not understand why he had saved 3 disasters and how he could have been allowed to be around children. The elder did not understand how it was possible to bring back into the organization the shamans of the Heavenly Lord who wanted to destroy him. Then the director leaned toward him and said that it was normal that they had awakened the mother of evil spirits with their advice. Mrs. Sim was confused because she was not aware that the Council of Elders had awakened the mother of evil spirits. The elder remained silent and said that it was all untrue, and the director asked him not to lie in front of him. After that, he said that according to one of the legends, Odukin had 3 children, and he himself knew perfectly well who they were. The elder understood that they had indeed awakened the wrong child, and were trying to subjugate the evil spirits to their power. The director was aware that the head of the elders had found a way to awaken the mother of evil spirits, and was trying to control her. However, as a result, he simply failed, and was therefore deprived of his life, along with his entire family. At the same time, Shinga knew that the elders were trying to hide this information from them, so they sent only him. After thinking for a moment, the director said that he understood exactly why they had voted for his decision. He understood that if they were not needed, the Shaman Association would simply eliminate all the elders. The elder was very angry and said that the director simply could not be appointed to this position and given power. The director said that he would act only for the sake of the Shaman Association, so he asked that this conversation be kept secret. The elder said that it was time for him to go home to attend to his own affairs, so he said goodbye to him. Miss Sim understood that she needed to hide immediately, so she summoned the spirit of the artist for her own safety. Thanks to this, she managed to remain unnoticed while the elder was leaving the director's office. Going outside, the elder realized that there was some kind of strange aura but decided not to pay attention to it. Shinga came out to see the elder off and couldn't understand why he had stopped and what he was looking at the plants for. The director thanked the elder again and said that now he could be sure of his own safety. The elder turned around and asked him not to do bad things often because someday they would all come back. Shinga said they would remember this and asked the elder to protect himself from various dangers. The elder remained silent, sighed deeply, turned away, and headed in his direction because he wanted to leave the territory of the Shaman Association. Mrs. Sim was confused. She did not understand how such dangerous spirits could be connected to the Shaman Association. The director went to his office and said that it was probably time for him to go home too. Sim understood that she simply had to inform the others before it went too far. However, while she was thinking, she felt that her spirit's aura was beginning to evaporate, which meant that her location had been discovered. It seemed very strange to her. But when she turned around, she realized that the director had revealed her location and was preparing to attack. The director began to enter a state of possession and asked Miss Sim why she made his life difficult every time. Stretching his huge, fiery red dragon arm toward her, he looked her in the eyes. Miss Sim was also very strong, and realizing that he was about to attack her, she tripped him. The director did not expect such a turn of events, so he lost his balance and fell to the floor. He realized that Miss Sim had simply tricked him and placed her foot next to his head. Ms. Sim was a living national treasure, so she said that he was unlucky with his opponent. She was confident that she could cleanse his dirty soul until it shone and guide him onto the right path. The director asked her to stop. He didn't want to scare her, let alone take her life. Miss Sim was confused. She didn't understand what he meant and decided to give him time to explain everything. The director said that he was very hurt and did not understand why she had started attacking him when he was just joking. Adjusting his glasses, he said that she would follow him. He was interested to see how she would get nervous and hide. Miss Sim had no intention of stopping, and she began attacking him again because she realized she couldn't trust him. She said that he had never been able to lie convincingly because his soul was impure. Continuing her attacks, she said that even if he had meant it as a joke, it had failed and was completely inappropriate. At some point, the director stopped her and said that he was not lying to her or deceiving her. Shinga said that he had known her for too long, so he could easily predict all her actions and next steps. She was surprised because he said that he had deliberately sent his assistant, Namga, away so that she could eavesdrop on the conversation. He said that the Shaman Association was indeed experiencing difficulties and problems that needed to be resolved immediately. Shinga admitted that he needed someone who understood the situation, and that person turned out to be her. He asked her for help, but she didn't even want to listen to him and continued her attacks because she understood that he could not be trusted. She said that it didn't matter to her whether it was a joke or not. She had come to cleanse his soul of evil. The director understood that they would not be able to talk calmly, so he decided to go into a state of possession as well. However, he immediately turned around and started running away from her because he did not want to confront her and hoped for understanding on her part. Mrs. Sim immediately ran after him, not understanding why he decided to run away from her, considering such behavior very strange. She pulled the rug out from under his feet so that he would lose his balance again and not run away from her so quickly. She said that he couldn't cowardly run away after coming up with an irresponsible plan to attract the students' children. She was sure that he was no better than the elders because he had hidden the body of the Heavenly Lord in his association, which was very dangerous. Then the director told her that there was a completely different soul in this matter, and that soul was Kim Do-hwa's son. The lady stopped. She couldn't believe her ears, and even more so, that the body of the Heavenly Lord contained the son of a famous shaman. The director smiled and said that the owner was not the same as 8 years ago. Now it was a boy who was born from the income of you. This boy was the next heir to the Turning Lantern after his mother, who had lost her life. Thus, this boy became a true hero who was able to prevent a catastrophe while engaged in the most evil and dangerous of deeds. He admitted that he wanted the boy because the Council of Elders was trying to destroy this body as soon as possible. Then the lady thought about it. She understood that this boy was not guilty of anything and that he also needed to be saved. Shinga said that he did not know what to do because he did not want to take the life of Kim Do-hwa's descendant and wanted to save all the students. That is why he proposed such a plan, only to protect everyone, but he could not understand how to act correctly. Moreover, they were truly indebted to Kim Do-hwa, who had helped all the shamans greatly. Mrs. Sim realized that she knew nothing about this and did not understand why he had not told her earlier. She understood that there was nothing more she could do, so she would not resist any longer and agreed to his terms. However, she reminded the director that these students were just as dear to her as the boy. She understood that they had to protect every child in the Shaman Association, even at the cost of their own lives. The director smiled and said that she was absolutely right and that they would have to participate in this together. Putting on her cloak, she said that it was time to leave, but that she did not regret attacking him. The director held out his hand to her and asked her to help him up because she had attacked him many times and he was exhausted. However, Mrs. Sim began to shout that he was not a child and could decide for himself what he needed to do. The director smiled and said that she had always followed him in the past, and now he was simply stating the facts. Miss Sim couldn't take it anymore and attacked him again because she was tired of him, since they had once been together and he had been her teacher. They had a long history together, and of course, she was right about everything, and Shinga understood that well. On the other hand, he understood that not every story could be a masterpiece, and he only read masterpieces. Therefore, it would be impossible to read all the masterpieces, which is why he liked Miss Sim, because she was special. Meanwhile, one of the students at the school was very frightened because people who scared him approached him. Looking around, he realized that they were not people, but real monsters and spirits who wanted something from him very badly. Suddenly, the spirits were distracted because someone called out to them, and they tried to understand what was required of them and who dared to distract them. Turning around, they realized that standing before them was the head of the shaman class, along with her possessed spirit. Her spirit was named Pun Beg, and she ordered him to activate all his powers to resist the evil spiritual beings, the monsters. The ghosts looked very frightened. They did not expect to meet a shaman on the street, because they were looking for ordinary people. The head was a very powerful shaman, so with the help of her spirit's power, she simply could not miss a single attack. The ghosts were frightened and immediately left the ordinary people alone because they could not cope with her and understood that she was very powerful. One of the ghosts grabbed a man in order to protect himself from the head of the shaman class. The headman reacted calmly to such provocations and simply called Kim Tae-sun to help him with Dukshin. The evil spirit did not understand what was happening because a fiery cloud began to appear above his head. At that moment, Kim Tae-sun, who was possessed by the spirit of Kebe, simply jumped on him from above. Kim Tae-sun really enjoyed defeating evil spirits because they were much weaker than him, and he was good at it. The evil spirit and the people who had fallen into a state of possession were very frightened and asked the shaman to leave them alone. However, she had no plans to stop. He really enjoyed carrying out this mission of cleansing the city of possessed people and evil spirits. The evil spirits cried because it was very scary there. They understood that they would lose and begged to be released as soon as possible. While possessed by the body of the heavenly lord Kim Tae-sun, he did not plan to let the spirits go and wanted to collect them in amulets. In this way, he managed to cleanse people's souls and minds of possession by evil spirits and easily achieve victory. Thus, the training was complete, and he collected the spirits in special tickets so that they could no longer harm anyone. His classmates also carried out the same order, but were very surprised that the newcomer was so strong. They understood that the newcomer was also strong, and despite not having lived with shamans since childhood, was able to resist. Kim Tae-sun had no intention of listening to them and told the head of the group to hurry up and tell them where to go next because people were waiting for his lessons. However, the head of the group reported that they had already completely cleared the area and could now return. The head counted the number of shamans and realized that Son was missing again and did not understand where he was or what he was doing. Son was indeed very slow, but Kim Tae-sun immediately defended him, saying that he was trying his best. Then he started laughing and saying that since he was strong, he could handle all the evil spirits on his own. A few weeks earlier, the director had gathered all the students for a meeting and spoke through a projector. All the students were very surprised because they did not expect the director to invite them to such a difficult task. All the students were dissatisfied because at first, the teachers had abandoned them to their fate, and now they wanted them to demonstrate their strength. Some students began to cry because they realized that they did not have enough strength to simply resist the evil spirits. Other students, on the contrary, said that the situation was becoming much more interesting, and now they were very curious. The students of Kim Gansun, who was possessed by a tiger spirit, just continued to sleep because they were not interested in any of this. That's how it all began. Lee-sun understood that this was exactly the outcome he had expected, but not so soon. He also noticed that the director didn't say a word about the situation he wrote about in his report. The students just didn't want to trust her because they knew this crisis would be tough to get through and they might not be able to handle it. At the very beginning, our hero agreed with the other students that they simply should not go on this mission. He said that they had already been forced to study at this school of shamans, and now they were being forced to fight evil spirits. Then Kim Tae-sun decided to talk to the other students to find out what they thought about this. Pointing to the monitor, he said that they needed to unite in order to declare a boycott and refuse to carry out this order. He wanted them all to go to the principal together and explain to him that they could not be exploited against their will. The other students agreed with him, even though they didn't like him at first because of his confrontation with Jahan. They began to discuss what exactly should be written in the appeal in order to actually avoid this mission. However, the principal unexpectedly announced that a very substantial budget had been allocated by the ministry for this mission. Our hero was surprised to hear the principal say on the monitor that everyone who completed the mission would receive a large reward. At that moment, Jahan approached him and said he could go with them to the meeting to show the principal where the crayfish spend the winter. But to his great surprise, Kim Tae-sun simply attacked him, saying that they should not rush into such decisions. Jahan fell to the floor of the school and did not understand why he was attacked by the man who had suggested the boycott. At that moment, Kim Tae-sun said that innocent people on the streets were trembling with fear and that they had to intervene. All the students were confused because he himself had just tried to turn everyone against the principal. Lee Seon was surprised, and Barry understood that such chaos was now constant because the newcomer had great power. Seon continued to cry because he was afraid of seeing real ghosts and was not ready for real confrontations. When the first team finished their mission, they came to the instructor to hand over the evil spirits they had caught. The instructor realized that the team had indeed finished faster than everyone else and thanked them for their work. Kim approached the instructor because he was curious how much money they would receive if they dealt with all the monsters in the city. After checking everything, the instructor said that according to the official regulations that had been established, they would receive about 1.5 million won. Kim Tae-sun began to wipe the drool from his face and said that being a shaman was truly his calling. When the old team returned, Namga said that they had all done a good job, but they still had one more important task. He explained that most of the possessed were gathered in the area where they were, and probably wanted to pass on some things to the shaman herself. That was why they said they needed to catch at least the deputy leader, who was surrounded by 4 opponents. One of the deputies had been spotted transporting supplies near the position of class number 1, so they had to go there. Showing his photos, he said that they did not know what exactly they were transporting, so they had to obtain important information. Therefore, instead of resting, everyone had to go and prepare for the next task. Our hero immediately raised his hand and asked how much money they could get for capturing the deputy leader of the enemy. Namga exhaled calmly and said that since the deputy leader of the enemy was very strong, the reward would be set at 1 billion won. Kim Tae-sun immediately started shouting that he was ready to go alone because he wanted to get such a big reward for himself. At that moment, the 3rd squad arrived and said that this would not happen because they had completed the task. Lee Sung reported that they had easily captured the deputy and that he had done it completely on his own, without the help of the other shamans. The deputy was unconscious and did not understand how he had been captured, since he had taken all precautions. Namga was very pleased as an instructor, because, as expected of Lee Son, he had completed the task ahead of schedule. However, to his great surprise, he reported that he had some concerns and would like to discuss them. He explained that he had managed to catch the deputy and his assistants, but unforeseen circumstances had arisen. He reported that after they were caught, everything was checked and no supplies were found among them, which meant that they were imposters. This meant that the enemies remained in position with Team C, and Namga thought about what to do next. Kim Tae-sun started shouting that they should send him there because he wanted to help them as quickly as possible in order to receive a reward. However, to his great surprise, San said that it would be pointless because Chagasong was in that very team. Our hero became very sad because he realized that he would no longer be able to earn money at that moment. The instructor immediately turned to the leader. Namga and Lee-san were very surprised because the instructor looked agitated and received a message on the radio. He reported that they had just received a message that Team C had been completely captured by the enemy. At the same time, Kim Gun-sun was unconscious and had suffered several types of damage, which was already a very strange event. No one could believe their ears because the tiger-possessed man was the strongest student in the Shaman Association. Namga quickly reached Team C to understand what had happened to them, because they all looked fine. The squad commander explained that he had placed a lot of hope in Kim Ga-san, but he had failed to complete his task. Then Namga decided to find out what exactly had happened to Kaina-san, what had happened to him, and what state he was in. Looking around, they saw that Kim Ga-san was lying on the ground, and it seemed that he was no longer talking to anyone. They immediately went to him to understand what exactly had happened to him and why he was in such a state. However, upon closer inspection, they realized that the man possessed by the spirit of the tiger had not been harmed and was simply asleep, which raised even more questions. A few hours earlier, shamans from the association had managed to catch up with a group of opponents who were actively trying to escape. Budul was Musinvan's instructor and said that they had found those who were transporting goods on the leader's orders. The opponents were confused because their plans did not include meeting another group of shaman students. They remembered that their chief instructor had given them a suitcase and told them to split up. This was because the students had surrounded them and they needed to deliver the goods to the owner as soon as possible. They felt that there was a very powerful shaman nearby because Barry and Lisan had a lot of energy. They understood that at some point, they would simply be caught, and their main task was to deliver the boss's suitcase on time. That is why they had to split up. And now they had encountered the team of shamans again, so they decided to split up again. The group of shamans was a little worried because they did not know what exactly they should do in such a situation. Student Javon immediately put on her headphones to summon her spirit for attack, which lived in her headphones. Switching the music, she added obsession number 1, called Flight, and immediately grew wings. Thanks to the music, she could control the actions she received from the obsession, and she really liked that. Her opponents were surprised because they had never seen ordinary music take the form of a spiritual being before. The girl easily launched all kinds of attacks on her opponents because she knew she could do it. By increasing the music playback speed by a few units, she herself increased and began to attack them more often and more strongly. Her opponents were confused, but one of them still managed to escape with the suitcase that needed to be delivered. Their instructor watched their actions closely to see if they could really handle it on their own. However, one of the students was very scared, so the enemy simply pushed him aside as he ran away. Not noticing each other, they collided, and the suitcase with the item that needed to be delivered flew to the side and opened. The suitcase contained a large amount of money, which was seen by all the students in the area. The Musinvan representatives were very surprised because they did not expect that it was just money that was being delivered and not something special. A classmate asked her friend to come to his senses as soon as possible and grab the suitcase or try to catch the enemy. However, the student did not understand what was happening to him, and a cancerous claw appeared in his neck area. The enemy simply threw him aside, picked up the suitcase with the money, and began to run rapidly in the other direction to hide. The student was very scared and realized that he had completely let his team down. But this was not the first time for him. The instructor was confused because he realized that the opponents had actually managed to escape from them and they had not been able to prevent it. The girl grabbed her classmate in order to try to catch up with the enemy and tried to increase his speed. She told her teacher that they had to catch up with the opponents immediately, but he asked her not to worry. Realizing that everyone was confused, he reminded them that it was at this point that Kim Gun-san was standing and waiting for the opponents. When the enemy, in a state of possession, was running through the streets with a suitcase in his hands, he noticed that there was another shaman there. However, although the man possessed by the spirit of a tiger looked very angry, for some reason he stood there and did nothing at all, making no attempt to stop the enemy. The instructor was delighted because the opponent had really fallen into the trap, and he was confident of victory. However, to his great surprise, the opponent simply pushed Kim Gun-san aside and ran on without any effort. The instructor and other students were very confused and did not understand how this could be possible. The opponent himself was also confused. He did not understand how he had managed to simply push aside a person with such a strong aura. The instructor was confused and did not understand how this could be possible because he had really put together a very good team. The female student wanted to catch up with her opponents, but the spirit informed her that the time had run out and her strength had left her. So all they could do was watch the enemy's trail with a suitcase of money, who simply ran away from them in the opposite direction. The instructor did not understand and could not accept the fact that they had really let the criminal get away. He understood that he was a smart person, so he decided to ask for help because he simply saw no other option. A classmate grabbed Kaina-san to understand why he had decided to just go to sleep and not help them. He replied that it was too boring here, so he decided to just go to sleep and asked her not to get on his nerves. The classmate understood that they had lost the enemy solely because of him, so she attacked him in the face. A quarrel broke out between them, but the teacher asked them to calm down and remain calm because they had other tasks to complete. However, the students did not listen to him and continued to argue, so the instructor stood between them and ordered him to calm down. He understood that they had to immediately restore the perimeter and wait for reinforcements in order to obtain information about the enemy. However, to his great surprise, the enemy managed to escape, and Kim Ga-san still did not provide assistance and went to sleep. The instructor was horrified because he realized that because of this, he would not be promoted, which meant that his students had ruined his career advancement. When he reported this in his report, he said that he was very ashamed that because of the quarrel between his classmates, they had let the enemy escape. Namga understood that they could not change anything now, so he asked them to gather their strength and pull themselves together before the next assignment. He approached Kim Ga-san and tried to understand why he had been so careless and behaved that way. He did not understand how it was possible to fail every mission just for the sake of sleeping. Kim Ga-san put on his hood and said that he didn't want to continue this boring conversation, but if he agreed to go with him to the confrontation, he might help the others. All the students looked at Kim Ga-san and realized that he had simply gone mad and was obsessed with confrontations. The chief instructor understood that in reality, things were not as good as he would like them to be, and that not all students could be relied upon. Jahan informs the instructor that his assistant had seen what the opponents were carrying in their suitcase. Namga became interested because this information could be very useful to them, so he decided to clarify exactly what they had seen. The assistant reported that there was a lot of money in the suitcase and nothing else inside it. All the participants were very surprised and did not understand how this could be possible because they thought that other items would be transported there. The main enemy's assistants were also confused and did not understand how one of them had been caught. At the same time, all the other enemies were defeated by the students of the Munsin 1 Shaman organization. The leader said that he was not interested in any of this and asked them to simply give him the suitcase with the money as previously agreed. After that, he decided to ask where their commander was so that he could give him the money. However, to his great surprise, the commander immediately came down from the roof to them to receive the goods. Lifting the suitcase with the money, he asked why it had taken them so long to deliver the item, which they were supposed to deliver that morning. Opening the suitcase, he saw a large amount of money and immediately began to examine it because he loved it more than anything else in the world. After that, he began to smile and say that money was the best thing that could ever exist in his life. His assistant was horrified because he understood that they had brought the money to their master, who completely ignored the fact that not all of it had arrived. Therefore, he asked his boss to attack the shaman in order to save his own people and bring them back to the team. To his surprise, the leader said that they had already obtained one shaman, so she considered the exchange to be fair and did not want to assist the others. The individual who was able to deliver the suitcase with the money was simply horrified. He did not understand how it was possible to exchange a person for money. So he started shouting that their boss was not worthy of such a high position because he did not care about his employees. However, the boss said that he was not interested in any of this because such methods could not bring him money, and therefore there was no point in it. When he realized that they were just doing business and were not a family who opposed shamans. After that, the boss gathered the suitcase with the money and said that money had always been above everything else for him and that nothing else interested him. It was at that moment that his assistants and employees realized that they were just a tool for making money. The leader was furious. Turning around, he asked why they thought they were any different from expendable materials. He really didn't like the fact that some of his own employees dared to raise their voices at him and wanted something. However, one of his assistants was simply furious, so he began to enter a state of obsession in order to attack his leader. In an attempt to attack his own boss, he said that he should at least be grateful to them for doing all the dirty work. However, despite all his strength, he realized that he was simply unable to do anything, and his crab claw began to crumble. He couldn't understand why the claw was passing through the leader's neck and couldn't destroy the neck of a defenseless person. The leader simply pushed him away because he understood that such a person, with such a look of possession, could not be a serious obstacle for him. However, his assistant, who tried to attack him, was surprised because he realized that not even a scratch remained. Then he decided to try to counterattack, but realized that something had happened to his evil spirit because his strength suddenly began to leave him. All participants watched this process closely and did not understand what was happening and how such a thing could be possible. When the effect of the medicine simply ended, the evil spirit began to leave his body because the human body simply could not withstand spiritual illness. The leader sighed and said that they were not just worried for no reason, because the medicine was really running out. The man began to beg his leader to give him the medicine, understanding that otherwise the spirit would completely consume his mind. He asked for the medicine as soon as possible, because he understood that without it, he would simply lose his life and would no longer be able to exist. The boss simply threw the ampules with the medicine and, with great malice, asked his assistant to try to catch him. The man tried to reach the medicine as quickly as possible, because he understood that he would soon lose consciousness and go to eternal rest. However, at some point, he involuntarily noticed that the boss was raising his leg toward him, which meant that he was up to something. At that moment, the boss stepped on his employee's hand because he had a great desire to punish him for disobedience. After that, he said that he should remember for the rest of his life who exactly his boss was and whom he should serve. Therefore, he said that they should be grateful to him because he was the one saving them from their obsession with evil spirits. The man began to cry very hard. He understood that the spirit was trying to take over his body completely and that every second counted. However, the boss ordered him to repeat that he was actually nobody and had no influence on their activities. The man immediately began to say that he understood that he was just a tool for making money. He began to ask for forgiveness, but the boss said that he had to repeat everything and remember it, and only then would he be able to get the medicine. After that, the boss removed his foot and cleared the way for him to the ampule with the medicine so that he could take it after all. The spiritual being, the ghost, was furious because he realized that the man would be able to control his powers, which meant that he would have to disappear. The spiritual monster's power left him, and the man began to feel better because he realized he was saved. The leader said that if he behaved in such a strange way again, he would no longer receive the medicine. After that, he turned to all his employees so that they could draw conclusions and learn a lesson, and nothing like this would happen again. He said that the world simply could not accept monsters like them, and therefore their only reason for existence was to serve him. He then showed them other vials of medicine and said that if they wanted to get them, they would have to earn as much money as possible. All his employees understood that there was nowhere to go, and they were ready to go in search of new money. He really didn't like that his assistants were trying to disobey him and started talking a lot, and his status was declining. The brothers Do Kebe Pekdu immediately approached the manager, realizing that he had done an excellent job with his task, and praised him for it. The older brother asked him to finish as quickly as possible because a guest was waiting for him in the VIP area, and he had a serious conversation ahead of him. Meanwhile, an assistant was sitting in the room holding a tablet with an image of the shaman Huarenha on it. The shaman on the tablet was just a projection, but she looked beautiful and was smiling as always. The boss was a little surprised and did not understand what exactly had brought the shaman here at this time, since their meeting was supposed to be at a different time. Varenha began to laugh and said that she just wanted to check how the work was going, and therefore decided to hold an unscheduled mini-meeting. However, Hanem did not understand why she did not come to the meeting herself and sent her spirit boy with the tablet, which seemed strange to him. The shaman laughed and said that it was fashionable now, so she also decided to try using modern technology. The assistant said that it was a little strange, but he was really interested to know why she had come and what she wanted to say. The shaman smiled and said that she had come to collect a debt, which at the moment amounted to exactly 3 suitcases of money and no less. However, her assistant jumped up from his chair and asked her to wait a moment, realizing that she had decided to cheat him and was asking for too much money. He pulled back the curtain and decided to check the amount of money he currently had on hand so as not to make a mistake. Then he realized that the shaman was charging too much for the medicine because the amount of money was rapidly decreasing. Seeing the large amount of money, the shaman said that her assistant was very capable and could add a few more bundles of money. Hanem counted all the money, neatly packed 3 suitcases, and informed her that she was charging too much for the medicine. Varenha checked the amount of money on her tablet and said that now they could make the exchange. Then the young man, who was the shaman's representative, took out a suitcase containing several packages of medicine for spiritual illness. Varenha said that this medicine strengthens health and increases strength, and that this amount would be enough for a week if used carefully. However, to her great surprise, Hanem said that there was not enough medicine because they were surrounded by shamans and the conditions had changed. He explained that he had given her 3 boxes of money, but she had only given him a suitcase with medicine, and there weren't too many shamans around. He explained that either she had to give more medicine or take less money. Otherwise, the profitability of the relationship would simply disappear. The shaman said that it was a little hurtful for her to hear this now, because she had also tried very hard for them and had also resisted the shamans. She explained that she had not been cooling off all this time for no reason, because the spirits of the shaman were in the north and she was fighting them off. She also said that it was a temporary agreement. So she tried to explain to him why she had charged such a high fee. She explained that she was like a mother to them who had created them, so the money would simply be kept safe until the time came. However, her assistant was confused because he did not understand when she had become their mother and when exactly the time would come to receive the money. Suddenly, the connection began to fade, and the shamaness on the screen was difficult to see because it was related to her current emotional state. She flew into a rage and said that he simply had to catch the chicken that had ruined all her plans. Meanwhile, Namga told his shamans that they were being opposed by a man who possessed the spirit of Pik-Du, who were very cunning and powerful. This spirit was originally of very high rank, but according to the information received, Huarenha had increased their power several times over. Therefore, all the shaman students had to be prepared to meet the most powerful spirit. Their opponent himself continued the conversation with the shaman because he became interested in who exactly had ruined her plans. Horenha said that they had to find the chick and punish it for disrupting all her plans to restore Doremu. She then said that the person they had to find immediately and bring to her was named Kim Tae-sun, and he was in Musinwan. He was one of the shamans who was now in the Shaman Association, under the complete control of the director. Thus, each of the opponents was given the task of finding each other, and the price was announced at 5 billion won, which was a very large sum. So the two opponents actively began to search for each other, because each side could now receive a huge amount of money for their souls. The shaman finished talking to her assistant and said that she would be happy to take care of his deposit and would definitely pay him. He also said that he would still like to get a little more medicine to cope much faster, because there were many employees. However, to his surprise, Kavrena announced that in the future, all deliveries would be reduced as much as possible for special reasons. She explained that she used to be able to make it in large quantities, but now she had simply run out of ingredients and could not produce it. It was for this reason that she spoke today about her most important enemy and said that she would be willing to pay a very high price. In this way, he had to prove that she had not wasted her time and money on him and that she believed in his words and loyalty. However, the assistant was completely confident in his abilities, so he said that she could start preparing the money because he was ready to complete the task. The shaman smiled and said that she was very happy to hear this, after which she summoned her spirit, Yangchem, to devour everything. The spirit immediately opened its large mouth to pack the suitcase with money, and the boy holding the tablet. He quickly ate all 3 suitcases in order to safely transport them to the right place and send them to his mistress. After that, she looked at her assistant one last time and said that she would definitely take care of it and collect the money. On the other hand, he understood that with the current number of participants, the medicine would only last a week at most. Therefore, he did not understand what he should do and did not notice that there was a spider on the wall watching him all this time. The spider was controlled by one of the shamans who had been here since the beginning of Hinam's magnificent reign and knew everything. He understood that if he managed to get ahead of Hinam, he would be able to complete the task on his own and win the love of Havaran Hu. On the other hand, he really wanted the shaman to accept him, so he wanted to get ahead of him and complete the task. At that moment, his personal assistants, who were spirit masters and were also very strong and powerful, returned. The manager did not understand why the spirits had returned so sad and why they had spent so much time in an unknown location. They reported that there were too many shamans of different levels on the streets of the city, so they were simply forced to leave. The manager immediately began to scold them, saying that they had received medicine, so they simply had to work for it in order to get it. However, they reported that they had not come empty-handed and showed that behind them was a man bound in chains. After that, they reported that they had managed to catch one shaman so that he could testify and explain the current plan of action. The leader was a little surprised and even glad that his shamans and spirit masters had been able to do such a thing and capture a powerful shaman. He understood that this shaman was incredibly strong and possessed the power of a polar bear, so he did not understand how they had managed to capture him. Listening to the reactions of his other subordinates, he realized that his 2 assistants were simply monsters in terms of strength. After that, he said that he had some questions for the shaman with the appearance of a bear, so he decided to begin the interrogation. However, his assistants simply blocked his way and said that they had their own plans and asked him to listen to them first. He explained that they wanted to talk to him about his effectiveness in order to make sure that he was worthy of the title of leader. They explained that he paid them and they were obliged to do all the dirty work, but some things had already crossed the line. They also said that while they were busy catching shamans, he just sat around doing nothing and then handed out medicine. They began to worry that he would simply abandon them at the first opportunity when they became useless to him and deprive them of medicine. The leader asked them not to beat around the bush and to say specifically what they wanted from him right now. However, entering a state of obsession, they said that they wanted to test his true qualities as a leader and his right to be one. One of his employees, who possessed spiders, watched what was happening with interest in order to draw conclusions. He understood that this was to be expected because the manager always treated his subordinates like trash. He also always thought exclusively about money, so the reaction of excitement among the assistants was understandable. He was curious to see how their boss would get out of such a strange situation. The shaman, who possessed the spirit of a bear, became interested because he wanted to see the internal conflict between the opponents. He even found it funny. He didn't understand how they could behave like that with their subordinates in front of their opponent. After that, he said that even though he was just a student, they would see that they were just losers. As the headmaster, he was confused because he understood that he was definitely dealing with an unusual student. Hinam understood that the captured man could not be a student because he looked much older and stronger. The assistant headmaster immediately began to attack the man who possessed the obsession of a bear. He said that he had no right to open his mouth because he was trying to cover for his friends on his own. At one point, he even felt sorry that they had done this to him because his friends didn't even look back as they ran away. Preparing to attack the captured man, she said that he had no friends or family because evil creatures were not needed by anyone. However, her actions were stopped by the leader, who approached the captured man and said that he was deceiving them and was not a student. The man possessed by the spirit of a white bear raised his face and said that he was only 16 years old. The leader found this very funny. He looked at his assistants and said that pride, at the very least, had to suffer. He understood that in fact, he was not dealing with a simple Musinwana student, but a completely different creature possessed by the spirit of a bear. Guan introduced himself and said that he was indeed a representative of Musinwana, but not a student, but an instructor. His opponent felt a little sorry that he was not dealing with Kim Tae-sun, but he had some questions he wanted to resolve. He stood there laughing and said that he was even curious to see how long such a ridiculous spectacle would continue. The assistant leaders were also confused because they had initially been sure that they had caught a student. When the leader pointed to the shaman with the obsession of a bear and said that he was simply allowing them to catch him, they realized they had been deceived. They did not understand how this could be possible because they always acted strictly according to instruction. However, while they were reasoning, the shaman easily freed himself from the iron chains and began to attack his opponents. As a result, some of the leader's assistants were attacked and found themselves on the opposite side. The enemy began to enter a state of spirit possession and said that he had indeed decided to play the Trojan horse. He said that he had indeed deceived them because he was actually 4th in rank in all of Musavan and was the best instructor. The leader of the bad company stood calmly and did not plan to enter a state of possession because he was not interested. Guan understood that he had simply been deceived. In fact, they had caught not a student, but a completely different person. They wanted to attack as soon as possible with the whole crowd, but the leader stopped him and said that it was not possible to attack a child with a crowd. The leader said that since they wanted to test his leadership qualities, he had to deal with such a strong opponent on his own. After that, he approached the shaman possessed by the spirit of a white bear and said that if he could win, everyone would be released and he would surrender. However, if he lost, he would gladly sell his soul in order to make a good profit. The shaman smiled and said that he had some conditions, so he agreed to accept his challenge. He said that if his opponent really did not want to lose, he should at least take his hands out of his pockets. Using the art of the bear dokebi, the opponent immediately activated all his powers to quickly achieve victory. Everyone present was very surprised because they did not understand why their leader did not enter a state of possession. Demonstrating his powers, the shaman, with the help of the white bear's power, said that he had a chance to take back his words. At that very moment, people possessed by evil spirits attacked their settlement. He understood that he was the only one who could resist the poisoned thorns, so he decided to protect his family. The shamans understood that they should not take their lives, but capture them and bring them to their leader for questioning. Then, the brother and sister who were possessed by an evil spirit began to argue with each other because they did not know what exactly they should do. Guan decided to take advantage of the situation, so he ordered his wife to take their daughter away from this place, while he planned to hold off their opponents. He realized that while their opponents were arguing among themselves, they had time to simply escape. So, he made this decision. They understood that they could possibly defeat them, but then their daughter would be gone forever. He realized that it was becoming difficult for him to move, so he asked his family to run after the instructors so that they could help. His wife looked at her husband one last time and asked him to promise to come back alive. After that, they immediately started to run away with their daughter, and their opponents were confused because they did not expect this. Then they realized that they had only one chance left, so they decided to take the shaman, possessed by the spirit of a bear, hostage. So he began to actively resist his opponent in order to protect his family and other students. He launched the most powerful attacks he could muster in order to win as quickly as possible. He was completely confident of his victory, but unexpectedly, his opponent stood before him without even a scratch on him. The opponent understood that he was in great pain because he had just lost 6 million won. That is why he was very interested to find out exactly how much the body of his opponent, the white bear shaman, was worth. Everyone present watched their leader in surprise, not understanding how he could have stopped.
They found it very strange that there was not even a scratch, even though the attack had been truly powerful.
The shaman with the spirit of the white bear was himself confused. He did not understand how this could be possible. The leader began to laugh and said that if he came closer, he would gladly tell him how he managed to stay on his feet. However, his opponent did not plan to fall for his tricks, so he tried to attack again to understand what had happened. The leader stood calmly and watched, not even trying to defend himself against this type of attack. He admitted that he was very pleased that they had decided to attack him unexpectedly, but there was nothing on him. The leader still decided to use the power of obsession to demonstrate to his opponent. With a normal fist, he attacked his opponent, the shaman, in the stomach to show him his abilities. All the people who worked for him were confused and realized that their leader was indeed very strong. Only the shaman with spider powers understood that they had just seen their boss's abilities for the first time, while he already knew all about them. He understood that thanks to his spiders, he had managed to thoroughly study all of his leader's abilities. It was all because the boss's true spirit consisted of two brothers, each with their own abilities. The older brother was the younger one, and was responsible for rapidly increasing the power of his young master. However, the main power lay in the abilities of the older brother, which were called the bonds of brotherhood, and shifted the attack to the mediator. Since the intermediary had to be something that was the strongest and most valuable to the boss, money was usually used as the intermediary. Thus, it was money that became the power of Hanem, who skillfully learned how to use these abilities. This ability could easily maintain his reputation for a very long time, because there was a lot of money. After that, he decided to demonstrate how he could control the spirits that served the shaman, who was possessed by a bear, realized that his opponent was actually too strong. The leader said that he still had money to summon a 100-year-old spirit, but Guan did not plan to give up. A new confrontation began between them, but no one around them dared to intervene because they did not have enough strength. Then, the leader of the evil spirits decided to use the powers of another brother to attack his opponent and win. The shaman, possessed by a bear, really began to feel ill, and his opponent asked him not to get up, but to admit defeat. Everyone present immediately began to cover their ears because they could not bear the scream that Guan was making. All the observers were confused because they realized that the leader had indeed received several unexpected attacks. However, the leader was very cunning, so he simply transferred his power to his hand for a while to save face. The shaman who controlled the spiders watched with joy as it seemed to him that his boss was about to lose. However, the leader once again entered a state of possession and began to laugh at the fact that the bear cub had tasted victory and believed in success. The shaman, possessed by the spirit of the bear, was confused. He did not understand how this could be possible because he was confident of victory. However, his opponent did not explain anything to him and simply attacked him in order to bring him to his senses. Then he realized that the chosen ability could strengthen certain parts of the opponent's body in any order. Therefore, he was truly invincible because he easily controlled the bonds of brotherhood and could transfer any kind of attack to other objects. The leader himself also understood that no one could ever defeat him because his powers were simply superior. However, Guan said that there was no such thing as invincibility, so he was destined to meet a stronger opponent. He understood that his opponent's ability was indeed formidable, so he had to be a little more cunning.